the presenter move over to Shannon, okay?
10-4, sounds good.
Thank you.
Fina, can you hear me? This is Matt Holland.
Yes. Hi, good morning.
Good morning. Good. I'm glad.
Morning, everybody. Can you all hear me?
Hey, John.
Thanks.
Charlie.
Thanks, Judge.
Dorothy and John, I just want y'all to know I do not have my iPhone with me this morning. It's in repair. So any comments anybody may have, they won't go anywhere to me.
I don't know how you'll function today, Mayor.
I've got at least until 1 o'clock without it, yeah.
I've never had a day without my phone. I don't know what that would be like.
Yeah, it's already been strange. I don't have a wristwatch. That's the first thing I had a problem with. I thought, well, what time is it? I have no idea.
You know what the mayor's really saying? He's saying, don't blow my phone up with texts anymore.
Well, no, I welcome those texts, but just wanted to know.
I don't know. I got hassled about spa treatments yesterday.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
You know what I was commenting on.
I was so disappointed the retreat was not at a spa.
Oh, no. To be clear, in this public session and private session, I am aghast at that, by that entity. Shocked.
Just to clear the air as well on another issue, you've noticed, I got this little dermatology thing that happened. This Band-Aid is what happens when you run out of your own Band-Aids. This is the Buzz Lightyear Band-Aids for the 3-year-old. So, this is...
It just gets worse and worse. Your eyeglasses kind of disguise it a bit, but I see now what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah.
Buzz Lightyear.
Band-Aids, growing up, Band-Aids were such a coveted item. Like, you had to be bleeding profusely to warrant a Band-Aid. And we never had those designer Band-Aids. It was just the beige Band-Aid brand.
That's what I've been having, I know.
Yeah,
I got
but
Buzz.
Different. It's a better look. Like, the last look when you had something here, it wasn't very noticeable, but.
Yeah, it wasn't very noticeable, right? You may as well have a bag over your head, John. It was
I know.
But this is far more subtle with the glasses.
Is it painful? Any pain?
No, I gotta have it. I just have to have it covered. I realized I'd run out of Band-Aids last night. Totally forgot to get any new ones. And I said, Sonny, do we have any Band-Aids? And she handed me this. She said, that's it, buddy.
That's it, yeah.
So it was either this or Woody.
One year as a child, they came out with Wizard of Oz Band-Aids. And, how much did I want those for the obvious connection? But no.
Oh, yeah. Couldn't have them. Oh, my God.
Beige.
Oh.
Tough it out.
For Band-Aids.
Yeah.
You're a better parent, John.
I was going to say you're better for it, not being able to get your Dorothy Wizard of Oz.
Dorothy or Tin Man or Lion Band-Aid.
Well, Mayor, I know you don't have your watch, but it is 9:02.
Mayor, I am waiting on Councilmember Gibson to join, and I believe we have everybody else online.
Mayor, we can't hear you.
We'll go ahead and move right into it this morning. I've done my welcome.
Okay. This morning's session will be post Greenville 2040 and implementation tools. So Shannon's going to lead us through that with her team, and then this afternoon we'll finish up with a review of our city council priorities and where we are with our work plan going forward. So Shannon, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. McDonough. Good morning, Mayor and Council. Happy Friday to everyone, and we're glad to see you here this morning. We're going to start our morning with a video from our team that Beth Brotherton and our communications team put together to celebrate part of our Greenville 2040, adoption and completing this process. And then we'll go into our facilitated discussion for the morning. I think we're ready to show the video. Mike?
Are y'all able to hear that?
Yes, Mike.
You were able to hear it?
I am.
My house. Greenville 2040.
Thank you, Mike, for showing our video this morning. And Michael is bringing up our presentation for this morning. And we are really excited after a long journey. Our staff has worked on this project with you all, the community, through City Council's leadership, through Planning Commission's leadership, and, of course, through our wonderful steering committee on this project for over 2 years. And we are now coming upon the end of this project for hopefully final adoption. And then now that we have this great plan, that is a real exciting step for our future is what do we need to do next to start implementing this plan? And so that's our focus this morning. I'd like to introduce to you our facilitators for our discussion this morning, Dr. Barry Knox. Dr. Knox, as many of you know, is Professor Emeritus from Clemson University. any planners that went, including our own Courtney Powell, who went to Clemson University for their master's degree in city and regional planning, had the privilege to learn from Dr. Knox. And then we also have with us this morning, and Dr. Knox has been on our Planning Commission and DRB in the past, as well as this morning we also have Thomas Eddington from CZB. And CZB is the consultant that our team worked with over the past 2 years to bring this plan to fruition. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our speakers for this morning, and we hope that you all have a great conversation with us about what you would like to see us do moving forward with Greenville 2040. Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. Next slide. Well, we are really glad to be at this point to work with you all, and I know that City Council has been involved every step of the way. And I also know, having been in Greenville for over 40 years, that City Council has been engaged every step of the way as Greenville has really come back to be the great city and place that it is and will continue to grow and become. So what we're going to do is provide a brief overview of the plan. I know you all have seen it, but others are involved in this, but we want to get a good stepping off point. But what's most important is to talk about the implementation process and next steps. And so after 15, 20 minutes of an overview, we want to talk about what implementation looks like and give you an opportunity to talk about these various priorities in terms of what you see them encompassing and how the city can start to work in implementing that plan. We'll also talk about consistency policy. Several of you have talked about the importance of part of implementing the plan is ensuring that actions of council, actions of the city are consistent with the concepts in the plan. So next slide. Okay, so again, the notion of really having a common understanding of how this will work, how we'll implement the plan. One of the things that I was really impressed with the work of the consultants on this plan is recognizing that the plan is a set of concepts based on what the city is, who we are, what we believe, and that the implementation of the plan is not simply 4 steps and there we're done, but it's an ongoing process. And it's a process that's consistent with who we are and where we want to go. So understanding those steps, and understanding those steps over 20 years is really important in terms of what it is we want to focus on, how we're going to do that, what particular plans, what investments, and so on. And the plans, direct the investments. So understanding that it's a matter of resources, actions, staffing over a long period of time. But to do that, we have to aim. We have to start by aiming in the right direction and focusing on the right issues. Next. Okay, so of course you have to talk what a comprehensive plan is. Lucky for you, this is not a class, and I don't have 15 minutes where I have to berate you on why a comprehensive plan is wonderful. Next slide. Okay. So a plan, and this is an outline of from the text of the plan, but a plan basically provides a framework for the physical development of a place that ties into what is going on in that place, what trends are coming, what factors are influencing the growth or lack of growth in that community, what challenges the community faces. So we deal with that by setting priorities. What's important to us is Greenville. Why is Greenville special? And we know it is. So we have certain values, we have certain goals, and from that we identify some core issues to focus on and then implement, take action so we can meet the priorities that we have, that we can become that better place, that we physically develop as we want to, which is supported economically and financially and socially, and through infrastructure and through activities. Next. So we start with a vision of the community. Next slide. And the steering committee the steering committee was amazing in terms of we started out hoping for 20 people. We have 44, whatever the number is, because so many people were interested. And these folks really got down, really were quite honest, brutally honest at times, about who they were, what Greenville is, and how they perceive it. As you know, the steering committee was very diverse in many, many ways. So I think everybody, certainly council, recognizes that these characteristics really do describe Greenville in terms of being enterprising. I mean, the business community has worked together for 200 years to move Greenville forward. In the 1790s, business leaders came together and basically plowed a path up to Asheville to expand the market. 100 years ago, we stole the International Textile Exhibition from Atlanta. So many ways in which the community has worked together to be enterprising, to be resourceful, to promote what we have. Great example, 20 years ago of reclaiming the falls and the river in terms of taking down the bridge, developing the plan and the Swamp Rabbit Trail and development along the river. We're inclusive. And this is something that the steering committee really, really emphasized in terms of valuing everyone in the community and wanting city actions and therefore the plan to really represent diverse communities and support diversity and deal with some of the changes in diversity that the economics have been leading to in the last 10, 20 years. And we're also courageous, doing bold things, doing big things. So these values drive what we do just as they drive what any individual does and considers important. Next slide. And from that, we have certain basic principles, certainly to listen to everyone, not to ignore certain groups. We recognize that we have some real beauty in Greenville. We have, the falls, the river. We have open space. We have, built up space, the downtown. We have beautiful neighborhoods of various characteristics. So we don't want to harm any of those assets. We want to maintain them. And to do that, we need to recognize that whatever we do has to balance financial, social implications to people, and environmental issues. The sort of triple bottom line that we now talk about in development. And so to do that, we need to set standards that maintain that we will look back on, or our children and grandchildren will look back on 20, 40 or more years from now and be proud of, that Greenville has continued to be a great place and make itself great. Next. So we are growing. The upstate is growing. More people are coming. And we want to absorb our fair share of that population. And that means we have to have space and housing for them. We have to have ways for them to move around. We have to have ways for goods and services to move around. And we want to continue being that regional economic hub that we've become. And one of the major challenges that we face is that we're getting crowded, and that doing things as we're doing them now will simply lead to further crowding and eventually gridlock. Next. So we want to grow, we need to grow and continue that growth. But to do so, we need to focus on preserving some basic characteristics that will enable us to attract people, to be a place that's desirable, that meets our goals and values, and that enables us to function effectively. And what that means is people can live here, can afford to live here. Unfortunately, over the last 10 years, we have lost a lot of lower income people. We need to reserve open space. As we grow and we build, we lose open space. And we need to maintain mobility. I don't have to tell anybody how crowded things get. Next slide. So the plan basically talks about not only having these priorities, but having specific goals that we want to aim at so we can be accountable and measure. And it's not saying, the plan is at a level of generality. So it's not saying that this particular lot or that lot needs to be preserved, but it's saying that we want to preserve roughly a third of the remaining open land as open space, one way or the other. And it does not have to be large swaths. It can be small parks or parklets kind of thing. But to have that open space and that feel of openness, that affordable housing is a challenge. Housing values, housing costs have gone up tremendously over the last decade or two. So how do we make sure that the market, that the supply of housing has enough housing that's affordable to working class people, that's affordable to others that have various income limitations? And thirdly, to focus on transportation and mobility, to make sure that we can get around in the city, that things aren't a gridlock, that's not a major mob scene, that we have levels of service on our roads that are decent, not totally backed up. So we want to meet those three goals, and we also, by doing that, we need to find a way to do that so that we continue economic growth and economic competitiveness, and we improve quality of life. Okay, next. And Thomas will talk about how to achieve that vision.
Great, thanks, Barry. So we've got a few slides here that start to outline how this plan, how this vision lands on the ground, if you will. And so you can go to the next slide. What Barry outlined the three fundamental goals of the plan with regard to open space, affordable housing, and transportation. I think that it's important to think about with regard to the plan is that all of these need to be intentional. The city has done an incredible job with regard to the efforts in downtown. That planning, that design work is unrivaled in the United States. And so I think what part of the desire of the plan was to show that that success can be translated within some of the other areas of the community and create opportunities for neighborhoods to have centers and to have to ensure preservation of the existing character of the neighborhoods as a result of those centers. If I think planning is as much about focusing what we want to do, where we want to say yes, where we want development to occur, as much as it is about where we want to say no, preserve this area, define open space, etc. Next slide. Along that line, the plan identified a pattern of development recommendation, nodal development, where nodes were identified throughout the community. I'll go into some detail in a subsequent slide, but in a nutshell, I think that this slide identifies opportunities for that transit connectivity, those major corridors that link the basic structure, the fundamental structure that we identified in the plan. That is the corridors that connect these primary nodes. I think, secondly, it's important to think about nodes as centers of neighborhood centers, as centers of opportunities for additional density, mixed uses, walkability, etc. That additional density offers opportunities for affordable housing where there's public-private partnership opportunities. And so you've got the transit component, you've got the affordable housing and additional commercial opportunities within the nodes. And as a result, by definition, you've got opportunities for preservation outside of the nodes, whether that's open space, community gardens, parklets, et cetera, as Barry had kind of alluded to. And so the fundamental structure is kind of this node and corridor concept, kind of this barbell bar concept, if you will. Next slide. So the idea of the nodes is to allow for this additional density in some of these areas. You can see there are about 10, 11 nodes identified, and the opportunities we see there are for, again, they could be neighborhood centers, small commercial centers, activity centers, additional density for housing, but any node would be an opportunity for the community to create a boundary. Nodes have pretty definitive edges, and so there would be a boundary around these small nodes of activity that would protect the neighborhood around it but provide that commercial center, that meeting center, that gathering center, that retail center for the neighborhoods that surround it. Next slide. So as we were going through the process, some people had a pretty solid understanding of what a node was, and some people didn't. I guess I would delve into a little bit more detail here to explain that a node is that opportunity where we could have additional density. You could see maybe 4, 5, or 6 stories in a node. It depends on the node. You have different areas, different nodes identified that would have different densities, but they offer an opportunity for office space. They offer an opportunity for retail gathering, experiential space, and they offer an opportunity for housing. Some of the housing on the edge of a node could be townhouse style housing that kind of transitions down into the existing neighborhood, and maybe there are flats or apartments within the neighborhood node itself. It's an opportunity to create that kind of walkable space that people like, that people desire. And with regard to housing, I think opportunities for additional density lend themselves to a housing ladder that could address the lower income housing, middle income housing, and upper income housing. But that's afforded by additional density. So a node would be something that would be defined in the land management ordinance and allow for mixed uses. Next slide. So this is a depiction of what, a simplistic depiction of what a node could look like. Again, I think it's worth noting that nodes typically relate well to the street level. They relate to the sidewalks. They relate to the streetscape, etc. The opportunity to incorporate the additional density allows for these mix of uses. If you were, for example, McAllister Square was identified as a potential node where there may be some infill opportunities. In a node like that, you probably see maybe a maximum of 3 or 4 stories relating to the characteristics that are already in place. If you think about ICAR or other areas that are maybe the Clemson Tech Center or other areas that are along interstates, you could maybe see 3, 4, 5, or 6 stories. But each node would have its own character. Each node would have its own scale. Each node would have its own sense of place. And so I think as we consider moving forward, looking at area plans, specific zoning, the land management ordinance, that's important to keep in mind, because I think that level of detail will be important so that there's a solid understanding of what goes into a node as opposed to a specific node, as opposed to all of the nodes being very, very similar. I don't think that is the case. Some are more neighborhood-centric, some may be more office park-centric, as I said, maybe out along the interstate. That's important to understand that differentiation. Next slide.
Thomas, can I interrupt you for a second? Sure. The one thing about this slide is it is a little bit misleading, at least the building footprints. If you look at the slide, it looks like every building is the same height. It looks like every building has the same use, and is very institutional. But the idea behind this is that we'll have varying heights, we'll have varying uses, and it'll have a lot more character and personality than at least what this slide leads you to believe.
Absolutely. That's a good point, Russell. You know, this slide was intended to really show opportunities for retail, commercial along the lower levels, and residential above. Typically, that would be the pattern, but you're absolutely right. And part of this comes down to the need for zoning code revisions, right? That is to incorporate character zoning into these nodes, right? It could be, we would expect different building finishes. We would expect different buildings would have different heights. There could be a 1-story building, a 4-story building, a 3-story building, but not unlike what you have in the downtown area, where you have various buildings at different heights, at different scales, with different materials directly adjacent to each other. That's what we would envision here. Certainly a much smaller scale, but same concept. That's a good point, Russell.
Hey, Thomas, did y'all ever touch on, and this might be a question where Shannon has to lean in, but with height comes quality in terms of construction. So is there a discussion towards minimum heights to ensure quality frame construction? In other words, we have some, particularly in the downtown area, multifamily, that are low enough height that they don't warrant quality frame. Mm-hmm. So I just wonder if that was ever, that might be getting into detail too much, but that is a concern of mine, and it doesn't, it's towards the converse of maximum. It's really the minimum to drive quality, long-lasting frame design.
And Dorothy, I'm gonna add on to that real quick. I read an article. Someone sent me an article not too long ago about squatters. The term is squatters, and the article was America's infiltration of squatters. And basically, squatters are, according to the article, are either 3 or 4 story apartments, typically that are allowed to be made out of wood, right, and less quality once you, I guess, hit a certain height. So
right, you were being more blunt than I was, but that's exactly what I'm referring to, John. Way to be an engineer. I'm impressed. Maybe you need a graduate degree in engineering, but that's what I'm getting at, and it is a concern of mine. So I wonder if that ever was discussed.
We did have that discussion. So number one, good point. I wish that you had been on all of our planning commissions throughout the United States of America in the 1970s when we needed minimums instead of just maximums.
Well, I was 10, so that would have been dreaming pretty big.
Darn it. Okay. But we did have that discussion with regard to the nodes, and one of the fundamental premises of the nodes is that they do have a minimum. There probably is a minimum of 2 or 3 stories, again, depending where that node is located, how close it is to an existing neighborhood versus if it were out on the interstate, right? So minimums are definitely recommended as part of that. That would be a part of the land management ordinance, establishing a minimum and a maximum, right? And maybe there's a density bonus. Maybe the maximum is, I'm making this up as I go, but maybe it's 4 stories, but maybe there's a 5th story allowance for additional affordable housing, for example. So yes to minimums, yes to maximums.
Okay,
so that
great.
People understand this is the parameter, this is the box.
We even had this come up, of all places in our downtown. This you called our downtown an unrivaled downtown. It's still always a work in progress, and there's always surprises that still come along. I'm just constantly amazed. So just a few months ago, we had a proposal to put a 1-story Starbucks on South Main Street. Unbelievable. And it actually got some traction to it before we finally killed it. But anyway, that's a good example right in Main Street. So all the notes, you have to have a vision of what you want it to be. Getting back to Russell's point about different sizes and shapes, and yeah, you need minimums too. If you're going to have a true node, you have to have a minimum.
And this speaks to the whole connectivity of the thought process to the action process to the follow through, in that the standards and the ordinance have to be done in sufficient detail and sophistication so that the characteristics of each node are defined, the ordinance and the regulations are consistent with how each node is defined, and then the boards and council make decisions with that. So it's a long train.
I would just leave it with, as we move forward on this, that something in our land management ordinance has to address that we want, for quality frame, and that we avoid, we've got a little bit, it's happened, like Mayor said, we kind of see it in the rear view, but, we're doing this for 20 years and beyond, and with that, you cannot have squatters, as Councilmember DeWorkin said, because they will be falling apart, and then you got a bigger problem. So thank you for that.
And it's also worth noting that you're right. Throughout the United States, the building codes allow for 4 stories to be stick built, right? So they can be wood built, right? When you cross 5 into 6, you have to go to metal construction, right? And it's a bit more solid. Part of that would be looking at revisions to the building codes for the community. I think that you can go beyond what is required. In most states, depending on the home rule status, you can go beyond that. But it is a really tough endeavor because most developers know up to 4, it's stick built, and it can be a little bit less quality than, say, metal. So everybody battles that. But it's a change in terms of building permit requirements. With regard to Go ahead.
I would say, yeah, there's a reason we see so much of it. We figured that out, yeah.
Yeah.
It's led by the...
And then I think with regard to planning and then the land management ordinance, you all know this, but obviously a comprehensive plan is a non-binding document, right? And so it's a strong recommendation. It should serve as the umbrella, the strategy to move forward. I think that you all are demonstrating that today. But remember, if there's something very specific that you want out of a neighborhood node, your downtown, et cetera, it's got to be in a binding document, the land management ordinance. It is really where the detail matters the most. And so plan first, focus on the tool, the zoning code, in terms of significant detail, as Barry had just noted. That's important.
And I just want to make a note to council, just you'll know. So we run into this a lot. We have the plans, and again, going back even in downtown Greenville in 2021, we have plans and design guidelines, and then we turn around and find out that no, we never changed the actual zoning or the regulations, and somebody could do something. And yeah, we have to make sure these things have real teeth behind them, I guess is the point.
That's exactly right. And zoning is that tool. Yeah.
Yeah. One point about the nodes. The nodes have to be mixed use. So all this goes back to what the plan is. So how do you really have mixed use in a node? What's the character of each node? Because you're right, we want everything to be distinctive and have character. And again, mixed use. But another issue you just can't get away from is if you have a node, you have to have a road plan, a transportation plan, and we all know our constituents. And you can confidently predict the first issue that comes up when you declare a node will be not all the things we talked about. It'll be road capacity and those issues, whether it's the village or anywhere else. So we have to be serious about proactively figuring that out too. What's it going to be? Because we're asking there to be, in effect, more road congestion, if you will, in these particular nodes. So how do we deal with that?
Right. You're right, and I think there's also an educational component to that, because if you develop the nodes, there is an opportunity for people to almost live, work, play in the node, right, depending what makes up that node. But you are right. I mean, any growth, even your growth now, comes with increased traffic, right? But if you can create a node, offer additional opportunities for people to live, work, play in those areas, you could alleviate some of that traffic congestion, right, just by understanding there is an increase, but at least growing as intelligently as you can. But you're right, that is important.
And the reality too is that we create the nodes, even the ones we have now. People drive to other nodes. they don't stay in their neighborhood node; they go other places. So you can't get away from that.
No, you're right. You have to prepare for that and offer alternative modes. Right, once you've got a pretty solid. The swamp rabbit trail, you've got pretty solid bike paths extending that, where people kind of get into the habit of short trips can be on bikes and walking. There's opportunities to alleviate some % of increase in terms of transit.
Yeah. Spreading things around, giving it other options, other places to go.
Yeah.
All good.
Mm-hmm. Good discussion. Anything else on that?
I like what Russell brought up about your graphic, because I think that's something planners run into sometimes. I'm glad you mentioned that. I've learned this is the night when we formalize this, having some actual photographs of what we really intend, along with something like this, is a good idea, because you have to see this and think, well, that looks like some suburban office park.
Yeah. I blame the architects, but.
or the software. How about that?
I'd add it in.
Thanks for that. Next slide. I think this is the last slide with regard to nodes, but you've all really hit on this already, and you have a solid understanding. But again, nodes are that opportunity to kind of create this vacuum, this yes to development here. We define it, we control it. As you guys were just discussing, the opportunity to start to assign percentages for commercial development versus residential development begins to force that mixed use. Again, this is all done with the very specific tool zoning, right? But the idea of putting development in the nodes by default creates an opportunity for preservation in the areas outside of the nodes. Not to say that nodes won't have some parks and plazas, et cetera, but the real opportunities for preservation and or acquisition of open space is likely in the neighborhoods. Again, it could be in the form of small lots for community gardens for a neighborhood. It could be larger purchases down the road could be open space bonding for a new park in an area that maybe doesn't have it. But again, focus in the nodes, preserve on the outside. And with that density, the opportunity for affordable housing presents itself and can be both required, or I should say incentivized as a result of bonus density within the nodes is significant. And then to the mayor's point, you have to make sure that we invest in the transit corridors, specifically those that connect the initial nodes that are the focus of the city. So all of that plays a role in achieving the three pillars, the three goals of the plan. Next slide.
Okay.
Barry, I think we're back to you.
Yes, let me talk about implementation. I have a few slides that kind of set up the implementation process, and then we're going to open it up and have basically just 15 minutes of discussion or so on each of the several areas in which the city needs to act in terms of land use, economy, open space, transportation, and housing. So next slide. One of the wonderful things about the plan is the graphics that the consultants developed are quite good and all-encompassing. So this is everything you need to know about implementation at 40,000 feet. Essentially, this top part of the slide talks about what Thomas and I have kind of tried to give an overview about in terms of vision, decision-making framework, priorities, outcomes, and action. But those actions cover a wide variety of topics. And basically, the comprehensive plan gives us the overall framework, the overall conceptual framework for all the planning work we do. I don't have to tell you the Greenville plans. And one of the things that really stands out, certainly as a planning educator and planning professional, is that Greenville takes plans seriously, updates plans, and continues to plan and succeeds. And I like to draw the line in saying that's why it succeeds. I'm sure there's some other reason involved, but I like the planning explanation. But the comprehensive plan basically guides a number of elements that we all have to pay attention to. On the right of the slide, you see housing policy, parks, corridor plans are basically focused on the three priorities that have been identified for the plan. But to support that, we need to work on the rest of it, on the rest of planning that's generally done. Certainly existing neighborhoods need to be preserved, need to be strengthened, need to be maintained. So neighborhood plans have to continue. Small area plans are going to be necessary to develop the specifics of each node, to work through those details, to set up regulations that will get to those details. Economic development is a core element of cities' growth, progress, and continuation. And then to enable this to happen on the ground, the city needs to update and totally revise, actually, the zoning and development codes. So there's this wide variety of planning and follow-through that needs to occur. And it's all related, and it all has to be consistent with what the goals and what the comprehensive plan priorities are. Okay, next. And that implementation process, I'd like to think there's a cute little spreadsheet we can put together that has the 40 steps to follow in order, in time. But the reality is we're dealing with the world as it changes. I don't think too many people predicted a year ago what COVID would do to all our behaviors. So we have to be ready for these sort of things, hopefully not pandemics. But economic changes, shifts in other disruptions occur. So we need to think about implementation in phases. And the phase one, the initial phase, is really laying the groundwork. And that's what we're talking about. Phase two, over the next 10, 15 years, is about scaling those systems up, really bringing it to on-the-ground action. And then throughout the period, it's a matter of evaluating where we are, how things are going, what needs to be changed, what new issues emerge, ways in which things would need to be tweaked or changed. So there's a sense of a broad substantive coverage and a sense of over time, how does this shift and how do we do things slightly different? Next slide. So the consultants very cleverly provided a framework with some details to at least start the conversation. And next. And so they have a color-coded kind of outline or overview of phase one activities relating to economy, open space, land use, housing, and transportation. Essentially, if you look at this pastiche of the on the right-hand side of the slide, the bluish areas really deal with land use and identifying, updating the land management regulations, identifying nodes, doing small area plans, working on the capital fund to support those. The green are open space issues in terms of what land requirements are we looking for, how do we acquire them, how do we select them and secure those open spaces. The peach deal with transportation. They're almost orange. In terms of looking at multimodal, how do we get these corridors to work with walking, biking, and transit, planning for that, enabling that, supporting it, funding it. And then the pink is about housing in terms of understanding the housing issue, understanding more clearly what our goals can be in the short term and should be, how we get to that affordable housing, how do we support that, how do we make that happen through zoning incentives, financial incentives, and financial support. So it kind of outlines the broad set of issues involved. Okay, next slide.
Hey, Barry.
Yeah.
I'm going to inject in, but we had some of us on council had discussion about the recommendation in this report about affordable housing, feeling like it was sort of behind the curve after we have a housing trust fund now. We had a task force of some sort on affordable housing some years ago, and now we have the trust fund, and they're busy at work, doing all their new strategic thinking. But I think what I see here maybe a little more clearly than I did before is that what you're talking about is looking at affordable housing on a different track, and that is looking at our zoning and our land use issues and how they affect affordable housing and different modes of housing. Yeah, and I would
trying to get this on the ground in terms of more than housing here and there, but looking more broadly in terms of how do you encourage it, how you let it happen, how you locate it.
Okay. That's good to know, because that's a better understanding. I would say, yes, that's something we have not done other than talk about granny flats and a few things like that, and garage apartments and all. We have, other than that little issue, we haven't really jumped into that. So I better understand now what you're talking about here.
Yeah, I mean, I think the city has wisely taken as a priority, opened the door, walked in the room, and looked at part of the room, but there are other parts of the room to get affordable housing, other avenues that could be pursued, and that's what this is about.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Excuse me, Barry, Ken Gibson. Given that we can't do inclusionary zoning, what are some, just to give me an idea of what we're talking about, what are some zoning things that we can do to locate affordable housing and to encourage it as part of the zoning code?
Well, one thing is lot size. The larger the lot size, the more discouraging you have for affordable housing. The other is the type, multifamily, providing more multifamily, providing, more subdivision. Thomas, are there some other things that
Well, I mean, we've been using a density bonus model.
Yeah, and that's certainly density bonuses. And, to have multifamily, to have additional stories, gives developers some flexibility in terms of being able to mix the coverage and the types of units. And,
and to be clear, I don't think anyone I hope not, but I never view it as, anything other than mixed income. In other words, the McLaren is an easy example to use. We certainly talked about it in broad discussions in the County Square area, but it's affordable units mixed in with market rate, all in that node location.
Right.
I will say this, and this will be a council discussion, but I haven't gotten in my mind that this replaces the need for funds from the city to the Housing Trust Fund.
Absolutely not.
Basis. In other words, we have a 5-year plan there in place, and I don't see us straying from that. This is not a replacement.
No. This is saying open more avenues. Right.
This is another tool in the toolkit that we have used a little bit in the past year, and we'll use more as part of this. But either our monetary contribution to the housing fund becomes part of a line item in the budget, okay, which is certainly something for discussion, or we continue this capital, somewhat random but somewhat planned as well. It's both and.
Right.
Barry.
Okay.
Barry.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Will Brasington here. Let me first check with Ken Gibson. Did you say you were good, Ken?
Yes, sir, I am. Thank you.
We're going to have an open conversation about housing a little later. So there's certainly more there. I mean, it's a challenging issue. So I wish I could say there's a simple answer.
Okay. Let me save my inquiry for the upcoming discussion period, Barry.
Okay. Thank you. So where was I with all this? So we've got a set of suggestions of the types of actions that will go on through this. And next slide, so we can get to discussion. I think this is the final one before we actually have discussions and open this up. So immediately, the priorities, according to looking at the plan and the conversation, are about, first of all, updating the land management ordinance so that we have the nodal process, the nodal model, and doing this, and as we just discussed earlier, defining neighborhood character in that process. Certainly, we need to continue economic growth and economic development. So that's a part of what the city does moving forward.
And Barry, I just want to, I always like to put a plug in for economic development. Really appreciate council's leadership to make sure that there's a corresponding plan that's going to be put in place and supporting innovation, entrepreneurship, small businesses, minority businesses across the board. We've got a long history in Greenville of supporting economic development. Appreciate being able to do that for the next 20 years because not only are we a regional hub, but we're one of 2 or 3 economic hubs in the state of South Carolina. So all good stuff. Really appreciate that.
Yeah, and I'll just put in my own plug that what I really appreciate about this plan is that it creates an efficient use of some space Greenville has over the next 20 years so that we can put more economic activities in place. And those activities can be connected with, people can get in and out of them, goods and services can get in and out of them. So all the things fit together. And it's just an efficient way to continue that economic activity. I'm really impressed that the steering committee and the consultants came up with this. Okay, and then the third element is, again, a process to do the detailed annual action, to do the specific plans and to think about annual action plans that carry this plan forward. Again, Greenville plans, how does that continue? And as a number of you have suggested, also to adopt a policy so that city actions are consistent with the plan. And we'll have an opportunity to talk about those as we move forward. Okay, I think now we'll move into various discussions. All right.
And 1 second. Shannon, am I turning this over to you at this point?
Yes, Michael, I'll be glad to. As we move into the virtual whiteboard.
Okay. Mike Blizzard, I'm going to stop sharing my screen if you can make Shannon the presenter,
I want to toss one in there early on. Barry, I don't think you and I have talked about this, but I've certainly talked about it with staff, and I think there's some new language in the 2040 plan. I think one thing that to me stood out that was missing in terms of being expressly a part of the plan is something that we absolutely, I think, have to be attentive to if we're going to achieve our green space and park goals. It's also, I think, important if we're going to achieve our affordable housing goals, and that is the need for the city to annex. Annexation, kind of like the economic development discussion, is just part of a sort of the macro picture here. You can't have a growth plan and pretend that we're in this little tiny city of Greenville bubble that will not grow and will not the footprint, will not enlarge itself. I think it's just one of those, again, if conditions precedent to everything we're doing on housing and green space, that we be attentive to our need to do what we're trying to do already, which is to annex property, especially in West Greenville, where you have vast amounts of underdeveloped and undeveloped properties. Things are changing, and again, whether it's going to be whether we're in charge of that growth and change or someone else will be, and so that's why I think it's that important.
Okay, good. We can talk about that in open space. And I believe that some comments, some mention of annexation has been included as an example in the plan.
I would really look to amplify that.
Okay.
So Barry, let me, Will Brasington here, let me jump in if I may. I've been bankrolling some questions over the course of the preceding 55 minutes, so if it pleases the group, I'm going to drop 3 questions or comments here. I'm going to piggyback on the mayor's mentioning about annexation right now. So we talk a lot, importantly and intentionally, about the need to preserve the character of our existing neighborhoods in Greenville. And we've referenced that already this morning. And we recognize the need to increase the amount of affordable housing. And just a few minutes ago, I think Ken was asking, how can we do that? We talked about smaller lot sizes. We talked about more multifamily. My question looking backwards, meaning over the course of this GVL 2040 steering committee's work, and maybe looking forwards, is this. Are we in a position to forecast with our existing footprint, meaning the small square footage of the city of Greenville, whether you can actually carry out those 2 things simultaneously, meet our affordable housing goals while preserving the character of existing neighborhoods? Is that attainable without growing, as the mayor mentions, through annexation?
Well, Thomas, have you all modeled some of that?
So we did some initial modeling. What I would tell you is this: it's your opportunities really lie with the increased density in the nodes. So, when we first started looking at this, we looked at different models for how the community could grow. If it grew on its current, with its current land use pattern, if we incorporated opportunities for the nodal development where there could be pockets of density, and we started to look at different levels of growth versus early on, we looked at the opportunity, what if you wanted to stay roughly where you are, et cetera. With all of that said, if you maintain the current pattern of growth, you will not achieve the desired affordable housing if you maintain current land use patterns. You can't achieve that. You can't achieve the desired affordable housing goals. With the nodes, you can achieve the affordable housing goals because much of that density, much of the affordable housing, much of the additional housing that might be necessary down the road would land in the nodes. And so those nodal areas, many of those nodal areas are only 1 story tall, maybe 2 story tall in terms of existing buildings, right? So if you can start to double those or maybe even get to 5 stories on some of the outer nodes along the highway, et cetera, you can start to increase density for those properties by as much as 300% to 500%. That's where you'll realize your opportunity for additional growth based on this plan structure.
So I'm hearing you say it is attainable, it's realistic, while at the same time, I don't know, what do we have, 15 or 20, 25 established neighborhoods in the city of Greenville? We can preserve things like lot size, look, feel, and character while embracing the node approach and truly achieve what we recognize are important but significant affordable housing goals.
That's exactly right.
That's
because
great.
much of this plan, almost all of this plan, was predicated on the preservation of those existing neighborhoods, right? The nodes at the intersections, that is the opportunity for change. Because we heard from the community so loudly and clearly that the preservation of the neighborhoods was so important. And so the change would take place in the nodes. I mean, in fact, I could almost see that as you all move forward with land management ordinance rewrite, that much of the neighborhoods would stay the same. Of course, it would get an overlay in terms of maybe a new designation, but the parameters, the lot sizes, the characteristics would stay the same. But significant change would take place along some corridors and in all of the nodes. That is where your significant change would take place. That's hard work, but that is where it should and could take place.
Yeah, Will, if I can inject a little observation. When I was looking at the map, getting back to my annexation point, which I think has a lot of benefits beyond this, two of the nodes that are actually designated in this proposal, actually, a good portion of those properties are in the county. The West End Village is literally one side of the streets, one side of the county. So we actually cannot have the kind of node we ought to have in the West End Village without annexing more of the property of the West End Village. It's impossible to do it. Another one is down at Potomac and Augusta. They designate that as a node. Well, guess what? A lot of that's in the county. It's not in the city. But it's right across, it should be in the city. So it just kind of affirms again that to really do what we want to do, to kind of stretch our wings and make this work, we have a lot of pinch points in our growth. And to me, it means they've been there for a long time, and there's some obvious places where they simply need to all be in the city of Greenville to grow the right way and to become a node.
Yeah, I would see those as targeted annexation in our implementation plan for sure. And Thomas, let me stick with you too while you're talking about nodes and forecasting. My final two questions are going to go way back to Barry's early slides, like slides 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in this presentation. So one of the slides reference what is a key either assumption or necessity, in my view, out of this plan, and that is this approach and economic development and new revenue generation being the fuel to fund the identified top priorities. Has there been the ability to forecast this premise about by using the node model, you could generate more incremental revenue to fund what it's going to take to fulfill the vision? And like literally based on certain growth models and assumptions, are we literally able at this stage, early stage of planning to say, this could be the incremental increase in revenue over a period of time and therefore give city leaders the opportunity to extrapolate that about how much money we have to fund resources, bandwidth, everything else?
We didn't get to that level of detail in terms of an economic development analysis, but let me say this. If you were asking the question this way, if you do the nodal development, can you get a better understanding, a pretty definitive understanding of economic development opportunities in terms of anticipated commercial square feet, residential square feet? Absolutely. We run that analysis at a high level, but the answer to that is absolutely. As you move into the land management ordinance, the area planning and land management ordinance, for let's say we start to explore, the city starts to explore a couple of the nodes, you can start to define that exact area at the parcel level, right? You can get an understanding of exact acreage and then start, if you assign a height allowance for that area, we could get an exact understanding of what could be built in that area. Right now, you don't really have that opportunity because you have pretty general commercial area that is spread along corridors, et cetera. But if you start to refine the land management ordinance and define the nodes, what can be in a particular node. This is a 3-story node. This is a 5-story node. This is a 6-story node. You can absolutely get that understanding in terms of economic development dollars. I would also say this. also benefit in terms of infrastructure cost. Infrastructure for sprawling in different areas or growing randomly is significantly more expensive than identifying 10 or 11 areas where you're actually going to funnel growth. So not only can you get you can get a definitive understanding of what the economic revenue would be for the nodes, you can also make a rule of thumb estimate that you're probably going to save 15 to 20% in your infrastructure cost as well. So that's a benefit to the city.
And Councilman Brazington, I would add to Councilman Brazington. I would add to that on page 75, just so the viewers can see that as well, what Thomas just referenced does identify nodes as value and revenue generators. And it even specifically points out that currently revenues are roughly $280 million annual, and that's through a variety of revenue. It's not just property taxes, your sales tax, your business license taxes, et cetera. But all those revenues do increase, and if the nodes are built out, Greenville can realize the potential of $3 to $4 billion of revenue in place of the 280 we currently enjoy in this plan. So that is a general estimate, and as Thomas said, it would become more specific as each node is developed as to what the value of that particular node is, and that goes back to ED, economic development, and what industry is attracted and what industry is going to support any particular node, and that'll vary.
Makes sense. That's great.
One comment about the annexation that Knox was talking about. I think we're going to need to develop a clear strategy on the reasons for annexation. And in my mind, the reasons are not purely economic. It's not purely to get tax revenue, but I think we have some opportunity, if we are visionary, to take some areas that need some love and show some compassion and redevelop. I think specifically of the Augusta-Potomac node, where the economy hotels are between 85 Malden Road and Augusta. And I think at least there we have a real chance to make that into a vibrant, welcoming gateway into the city that is currently a liability. So we need to be, I guess, a little more visionary in our annexation strategy and what can we do to improve those areas. Bramlett is another good example of an opportunity that we may need to look at. So, I mean, just for what it's worth, comment.
Well, adding to that, the revenue we found in some cases was not necessarily a major drawing.
Yeah.
In some of the areas where I represent, it is cheaper for them to come into the city. We save them money, and we provide them much better service for police and for trash collection and for lighting and some other things, and would not have actually known that had we not had the staff to generate the information so we could share it with those communities. So it is something that that was very helpful for me as a council member, but also for the members of the community to see that it was easier for them to come in. And of course, it benefited us greatly because it helped the uniformity. You were able to do a whole street instead of part of a street, which was a problem in several neighborhoods of mine that are all near the county.
I'll also add in, I think something that ties into the annexation strategy is the data from the census. I don't know how you can separate those two. So, when we get that, later in the year, to me, that has to be part of what we look at in our annexation strategy and what we value and where we see the right fits to bring into the city.
Right. Yeah, I'm hearing from you all that the annexation is a set of, there needs to be studies on annexation that relate to the nodal area plans that also relate to economic development. So, Shannon, I hope you have that down in your whiteboard.
And Barry, as Kid Gibson, as part of that, and I don't know. I don't know if there is anything out there that may help us, but can we also probably need to look at what our current ordinances and regulations are to see if there's anything that we need to change from a city perspective that would make it easier or more efficient. I imagine that a lot of this is dictated by either state law or state policy. But like I say, if there's anything that we found in our practice experience from our own perspective that makes it more difficult, we need to look at that and determine whether or not it's worth the change.
Yeah, state law is the real difficulty in South Carolina. They make it very hard to annex. Relatively hard to annex. Well, I don't know where you want to stay on the whiteboard because those are the issues that relate to economy.
Is this the open discussion time?
Yes.
It's our first
Barry, why don't you spend a few minutes, you and Thomas, and kind of talk to council. I think it's important about that really what's becoming a national discussion about land use and zoning and how it's impacted affordability in every city in America. And then there, of course, you have some cities that have taken a pretty radical step of basically almost eliminating they have eliminated single-family residential now. I just think it's important for us to know that about the debate going on, and we're not going to take a radical step, of course, but we're addressing these same kind of issues. It's kind of an eye-opener to understand what either Thomas or Barry mentioned earlier, which was large lots inherently are the opposite of affordable housing, and yet we're all about preserving character of neighborhoods. We want to kind of keep things the way they have been. But at the same time, we need to realize what the impact of some of these policies have been.
I mean, one of the, sort of the market reality is that scarcity raises prices. And when you limit the amount of land available for housing, then housing is more scarce and it costs more. When you zone land that's specifically for housing and specifically for larger lot housing, you're zoning land for expensive housing. And you can look at the city of Greenville and you can see where the larger lots are. You can look at the demographics of those populations versus the smaller lot areas, and you can see differences in race, you can see differences in income. And, it all follows logically and economically in terms of that. So when you separate uses, you're creating transportation challenges because you got to get from where you live to where you shop and where you work, and they're far apart. So you need a car or some other way of getting there. So you're adding infrastructure costs. You're limiting the land. You're defining higher cost housing for larger lot land. And so, there's a trade-off in preserving neighborhoods and having those neighborhoods become more exclusive. And how do you preserve neighborhoods and create neighborhoods that are affordable that don't become unaffordable? And so some of the thoughts about zoning are to basically loosen the single use requirements of land to turn more of a form-based kind of approach where you look at building scale and size and character. And so you would have rural, less rural, more suburban, slightly more dense suburban, then you get into more urban categories. So you're thinking of density of development as opposed to specifically housing or retail or industrial or some other use or institutional. So that provides more flexibility in land and the types of building that can be there, the types of housing that can be there. So the sense of trying to open things up.
Barry, what are the we're starting with, it looks like we're starting with economic development, which is fine, but what are the other topics that we're going to hit?
The topics are land use, open space environment, housing, and transportation.
Right.
Okay. All right.
And
go ahead.
We'll try to have another maybe 5 or so minutes on economic development to make sure we get through all of them.
Well, and I think it is very wise that I don't think we have and this is not a dig on anyone, but we don't have a formal strategic plan on economic development. I mean, we don't know. I mean, are we going after major headquarters? Are we going after development of business from within? We just don't have, I think we know in our heads what it is, but I would really encourage us to have it in a formal written strategic plan.
Well, isn't that what we're expecting this summer, 2021? I mean, that's what it spells out in the must-do checklist.
Yeah.
So I see that as Merle's marching orders, and we're expecting it this summer.
But I want to be very clear. Everything that we do, the housing, the transportation, all of it's economic development.
Yeah.
It drives the people to you. I'm saying you don't want, businesses will not come to Greenville to bring people if there's no place for them to live. They can't get anywhere. They can't play. They can't do anything. So what we set in mind, you need to think, it's not a separate topic. Economic development is the basis for everything. For your land use, for your open spaces, for your transportation, for your housing development. So, that sounds good to me, but it needs to be on every page. It is an economic development generator. And that's the one thing that we need to pay close attention to when we do this. It is not a separate issue. It is integrated into everything that we do. The other thing is recreation. Folks, the first thing I learned as a new council member some 40 years ago was that the third highest priority of any community is where people work and play. If there's no parks, recreation places for them to be safe, all of it's economic development. And so, I was a math teacher. I used to laugh because being a math teacher also meant I was an English teacher. I was a economics teacher because I had to do all of those things. It's integrated. And we in America have got to stop putting things in a little box and think it's going to work that way, because it does not work that way. Everything is integrated.
Yeah.
Economic development is the city. So I've had my sermon for the day.
Well, Lillian, your sermon is the triple bottom line approach. I'm going to bring you over to teach a planning class, because that's exactly what you just so eloquently presented.
I hope that's not your last sermon today, Lillian. I hope you have a couple more sermons for us.
I'm just making sure we're not creating multiple documents. So maybe I'm misunderstanding, but your question.
Exactly right.
The gentleman, you all say, what should be the focus of the economic development business strategic plan? Now we know the city must create an economic development strategy. Russell's question was, when, who. I'm saying the way I read this is that is exactly what Merle and his team are working on for this summer. And Lillian is saying it must include the transportation element, the housing element. Our job in recruiting business is making sure we can give them the people to work in their business. We must be able to provide them the workforce. Yes. And that means having them, and they can live here, and we can get them there. Yes. So, I'm assuming that document, that plan that's referenced on this slide is not something in addition to or separate from what Merle is working on. And, the who should be involved in the economic development business strategic plan is obviously, our public-private partnerships are what we have relied on for so long, not to mention, so that certainly needs to be a consult in it, not to mention representatives from our education system have to be a part of that discussion too.
Yeah. Line number 3 says, plan cannot be separated as an individual issue. Come on, children, we're reading the right pages here. Let's get this thing straight. Everything we do, the last sentence should be economic development. It is. We create what we see. So I'm just saying, I think we're going to be working all together until Paul Merle going to be tired, and we're going to have to put into his lesson, week off, because he's going to have time, because the economic development is us. Yeah. That's us.
The question, I think, is are we giving guidance to Merle as to what we want to be in this plan, and particularly from question for me, are we going to identify the types of businesses and the types of industries that we want to come? One of the things that, and we talked about this at last year's retreat, it seems like a lot of our economic development now is businesses come to us and they say, hey, we want to be here, and then we throw out, some incentives for them to come and be there, as opposed to us being proactive and saying, these are the type of industries and companies that we want to come, and then going out and actually recruiting and getting those types of industries. And to piggyback on, what Councilman Fleming said, it is all holistic. I mean, it is all integrated, because certain industries, certain companies, certain businesses will want certain things in the quality of life that will attract them, as opposed to other industries. So if we know the type of industries that we're trying to go get, that will also inform the type of quality of life that we're trying to create in order to attract those businesses. But like I say, what are we as council going to make the determination of what kind of businesses and industries that we want to go after? And if we are going to do that, what is the process that we're going to go through in order to be able to do that? I mean, I don't have the economic knowledge to be able to say this is the best industry for Greenville, or this is the type of industry, or this is the type of company that we should be going out and trying to get. And maybe there's some people out there who do. I'm certain there are some people out there who do. But we need to try to figure out what the process is going to be so that we can make that determination, because quite frankly, that determination is going to drive a whole bunch of other questions, issues, policies that we're going to have to determine, for the next 20-odd years. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I agree with you, Ken. And the other thing is, not only do we want to show them what we have, what are they bringing? We can't be any more of the giveaway city. If they're not bringing something and can contribute to it, then we need to put them on the list. I'm just saying, we need to make sure that they have a valuable asset for us. Right. This is not a bedtime. This is we're moving forward constructively. So I agree with you. We need to
something like along the lines that we're not a cheap date anymore.
We are not cheap. I'm going to say it every chance I get. Greenville is no longer a cheap date. And, to Ken's point, that's exposing exactly, I think, the sentiment that I think our council body is moving towards this realization of a will to be proactive rather than reactive, kind of like the retail recruitment strategy we've talked a little bit about. We have enough established strengths in the city, certainly in industry, to where I do think it's not unreasonable for us to be out recruiting rather than waiting for them to come.
Let me offer this, if I may.
This is Merle. So I hope everybody will just give me a few minutes here, just real quick. So thank everyone, all you council members, for all the insight. I appreciate it, and I just want to address a couple of the questions and the statements here. So first and foremost, every single economic development strategy I've ever done or been a part of, number one, to Councilmember Fleming's, as she was saying, it is done holistically, okay? And so you have to do it to be effective. Number two, to everyone's questions, not only is the city staff involved in that, but obviously city council's involved in that. But I will go one step further to where, again, the city manager has started the process, and we continue to move down that. Is we are a city within a county, within a region, within a state, and those stakeholders have got to be involved, because our success is dependent upon their success, and just as importantly, their success is dependent upon our success. And so, as everybody was saying, I truly believe that it all revolves around each other, and all those pieces that Councilmember Fleming was saying and everybody else is saying with regards to both talent and workforce development, to retail, to office recruitment, to innovation and entrepreneurship, that all fits into that. And so I can guarantee you all that you all will be involved. There will be lots of people involved. And to the question down there, we have started to work through and try to develop what we believe that process should be and should look like. However, again, there are lots of very good consultants out there that I think will help us through this process. And I will go out there and say we're developing and working through a retail recruitment strategy. We actually have an office recruitment strategy in-house that we are actually utilize and look at, and you'll hear some updates this afternoon as it relates to the economic development portion of it that we need to start moving forward with regards to that. And then another component that we're looking at that I think will play a big role into this economic development strategic plan is the innovation, entrepreneurship, small business ecosystem that we want to build here and retain here, right? I mean, I heard loud and clear from you all as well as the neighborhoods, we can't leave anyone behind. And so I've got all that. That's all great. And so I appreciate all this information, but just know and understand that the guidance you're already giving to me and to the team, we've already started down that path because that's just what's being driven, especially out of the city manager's office, of this collaboration, cooperation, and all that. So this is all good for me. I appreciate it, and I'll go ahead and let you all finish your discussion.
Yeah, let me offer a couple thoughts that I think will fit with the whiteboard style discussion. I hope they will anyways. It occurs to me that there's the need for, and we're already positioning ourselves to recruit with intentionality or go out and do things proactively. But I keep reflecting on what I'll just refer to as climate condition type things, which are, no matter what we're trying to go out and enact and change through our own efforts, what are the tools, the resources, we use that term public-private partnership because it is, but what other arrows in the quiver might be missing in general or specifically for certain facets of our business community, whether we're innovative and we come up with them on our own through our own creativity, or they're elsewhere and we've just yet to deploy them in Greenville. So that's a thought, and I don't have the answers. I'm not trying to say, here's how we do that. I'm just saying that's what's on my mind. Second thing, just for the benefit of being transparent, back on the first couple of slides that Barry showed about GVL2040, and we talked about were they core principles or guiding principles? I don't recall what they were, but they were about 4 of them. And 2 of those words that escape me now talked about the need to be bold. And so I'm just interested, not only in economic development, but all of this that we do on how we balance. I think you can balance it, but how you balance being bold with being inclusive and leaving no one behind. And what I'm trying to say there is it occurs to me at some point in this process, as we stake our claim on the future of Greenville's economic development, I don't know that we can or will be all things to all people. I think we're going to have to say this is what we're focused on, even at the potential expense of something else. And I also don't have the answers to that. It just occurs to me, there you go, courageous, right, enterprising. And so that's just my way of saying, are we all in on entrepreneurialism? Are we all in on home growing our existing small businesses? Are we recruiting this sector or that sector? I mean, those are the macro level top line things I think council ought to be discussed on. And beyond that, it needs to be left to Merle and the community of business leaders and experts to develop recommended plans that we would ultimately approve.
Will, can I just add on to that a little bit? I don't know if I have an answer for you, but I'll just have some thoughts on that. And I think that we are sophisticated enough and we have enough resources here in the city not to be a one-trick pony, right? Like, I think we've got the ability to say, all right, here's the plan. Here's the overall economic development plan for the city of Greenville. And if we don't do it, no one else will, right? So I think we have the ability to say, okay, within the economic development plan, an overall arching objective of what we want to accomplish, what falls underneath that? What falls underneath that to me is what we talked about, innovation, entrepreneurism, how important that is, and I'll just kind of reflect a little bit on what other cities have done, particularly with that, with talent recruitment, fostering entrepreneurship, innovation. Not that we want to be Nashville, not that we want to be Raleigh, not that we want to be Austin. We want to be the best Greenville we can be. But what does that mean with innovation and entrepreneurship? The reason I'm bringing up those cities is because at some point they said, we want to foster innovation and foster that entrepreneurship that's going to create that innovation and ecosystem here. And that's just one segment. And then we also say, okay, listen, we've got retail. How important is retail to downtown? How important is retail on the corridors? It's incredibly important. All right, so let's put a strategy around that. And then we've got what I think are equally important, and that is, what about our small businesses? What about our minority and women-owned businesses? What do we do around that? So I think that you can encapsulate all of those areas into one economic development plan without not only does it not dilute the other, you don't dilute each other, right? You're not moving innovation on the backs of small business, but in fact you're moving everyone together, to Merle's point, to try to achieve robust economic activity amongst all those entities. And so I contend that we do have the sophistication to be able to do all those things together. Another important point I want to make, I'm sorry I'm being long-winded, is Merle brought up the importance of partnerships and coalitions. And I'd also say not stepping all over each other, but stepping in line with each other. So, I think our conversations about downtown retail, our conversations about, Mayor talks about annexation. I think Will's dog agrees. That's a yes vote.
Yeah, that is my dog. I'm sorry. I just want to spill my coffee.
I think that's a gone. Your time is up, Don.
Yeah, my time's up. So anyway, I'm so long-winded. I'm so sorry, but I think it all can work in concert together. And I also think that the partnerships that we have and Merle brings to this with the state level folks, the county folks, I think are invaluable as well. And I have great faith that we can do it. So thank you, Will Dog, for cutting me off.
I'd like to. I really appreciate everything Lillian said a little while ago and Ken amplified, and just kind of want to point out that we take this for granted, but a lot of things everybody just said on this wonderful city council, we take it for granted, but a lot of elected bodies don't think this way at all, unfortunately. And there was a really significant day one time years ago when the GADC, the county's economic development group, relocated its office to Main Street. And that was an astounding thing. It was the first time, and some county council members finally talked about it. It was like the light bulb finally came on, that all this time the city was on to something. The city was on to something, and that's why they put the GADC office on Main Street. That suddenly they began to realize that the recruits and manufacturers and industrial prospects that might locate in Simpsonville, that the big draw for this area largely was downtown Greenville and all that had been done by the city. And that's because the city figured it out a long time ago that quality of life is what it's all about. That, what Lillian talked about, the parks and the quality of life and the green spaces and all the stuff in the comp plan, we get it. I mean, we totally get it. That focusing on that first and foremost is the best thing we can do as a city. And then everything else, the tools and the processes and the procedures come after that. And it was a significant day. So I just appreciate so much hearing it, and unfortunately, some of our brethren elected officials and bodies they still don't get this. They still honestly don't get it. That figuring this stuff out is important too. So quality of life is something we never apologize for, and because of that, we attract talented people, companies, people want to come here, and it's made our life easy enough so that Merle can come in here and he has something to work with.
So here's a quick question for the group, and maybe Merle has this answer, but it occurs to me way back at the beginning of the slides at 9 a.m. we showed the 3 priority areas, and there were initial sort of quantifiable outcomes associated with each of those priority areas, like maintain at least. Yeah, thank you very much. That was quick. God, good job. So how do we start with economic development with the end in mind? The most concise, simply stated end goal in mind first. I think we all know what economic development is, but my question is, what ultimately, by focusing on economic development, are we wanting to achieve? And then that sets you up to say, well, what are all the various ways that you do? Have we settled upon that in the here and now within the city of Greenville?
So what I would offer up, Councilmember Brazington, is that through the Economic Development Strategic Plan, again, having seen it done elsewhere, this comp plan, GVL2040, will be a plan that they review, and it helps guide them. But then this body here, City Council, will then have that discussion with those consultants to help develop what those end goals should look like. Does that make sense? Because again, without your input and your guidance, I don't think we can just adherently just say, go ahead, we're going to do this, because that won't work. So I think that will be bubbled up through the process of the Economic Development Strategic Plan.
I guess what I'm hearing you say is the whiteboard session for this morning about economic development will rear its head again with consultants for economic development down the road. All right, cool. We'll save it for him.
Well, and Merle, I see us at a unique place, and I'm not saying this hasn't been this way in the past, but I do think this particular council brings different, and maybe that's why we're all here, but different perspectives and different strengths and backgrounds. It does not go unnoticed on me, the makeup of our city council, the history we bring in our life experiences, and that collective body. I think we're here to help steer you and reach that balance where no perspective is left out. I mean, I really think we have that makeup as a strength. And, Will is an expert on Clemson, and Ken brings the legal view, and John brings the state view, and all those things. I just think as a collective body, the reason we're so passionate about this is we all have those life experiences and think that the group as a whole wants this formula right. We know you're on it. We have faith.
I'd like for us to get on to talking about the priorities.
Well, with that, Councilmember Saul, I have been asked to provide a restroom break, so we're going to take a break. We'll come back at 10:45 and resume and go straight into our next conversation, which will be on land use. Camilla, do we need to do anything specific to go into break? I want to make sure that we're good.
No, ma'am, we're at recess.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Camilla, do we have everyone back? And Mayor, are we ready to go ahead and resume?
I think we can. Hope we can. Been a great discussion. This has been one for the ages.
Can I make a general comment? I think one thing that we need to remember is the comp plan is basically a land use plan. It is not an economic development plan. And I would encourage us, we need a separate economic development plan. We need personally, I think we need a really good strategic plan for the city that involves all things instead of just land use, instead of just economic development. But starting the conversation with economic development was important. But at the same time, remember, this is a plan for growth. It's a plan for how we're going to manage climate change. It's a plan for how we're going to manage traffic and all those other things that are involved in land use and specifically rewriting the LMO. So, I mean, just a general comment. One thing about the plan, though, I mean, no one's really talked about the plan overall. The plan is awesome. I mean, the comp plan is a phenomenal document that I think we're going to be really proud of in years to come, and other cities are going to use it, and other cities are going to try to emulate what we've done because I think it's bold, it's expensive, but at the same time, let's remember the purpose of this, the real purpose of the comp plan, which is how are we going to grow and how are we going to manage that.
I concur.
You're muted, Shannon.
And I just want to underline that Barry began his discussion with us. He said this plan is about the physical development of a place, and I appreciate those upfront comments as Russell was trying to underline as well.
And it's bottom line, it's about quality of life. And I mean, is this a place that people are going to live and stay and be?
So
okay.
Now, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Councilmember Stahl and Councilmember Gibson, for your comments. And now, Dr. Knox, I think we're ready to move into land use and our facilitated whiteboard discussion concerning land use.
Okay. And one of the things that came up, certainly that permeated the discussion, is that everything's related to everything else. That the comprehensive plan, it focuses on land use, but the land use decisions and implications affect, again, the triple bottom line, that everything has to be interwoven and interrelated. And, you know, we need to think that way as we move forward. And you all gave so many examples of why that's important in that process. Okay. So the land use issue is, you know, really about how do we implement this notion of promoting growth through nodes? How do we define nodes? How do we do it in a way that protects existing neighborhoods? That's a simple question. Thoughts about that?
The node and corridor is certainly a change from what we've done over the last 100 years.
Yes.
And I think it's going to take a lot of education. We're already seeing a little bit of fear in some of the neighborhoods on why am I a node? I mean, why are you trying to put development in my neighborhood? But I think through education, we can educate that this is a good thing. It's a good thing to be in a node. Because things are planned, you don't have uses that you don't want. So I would really encourage us to spend a lot of time on education with the neighborhood associations and with those especially that are within the nodes. And also it's important to point out that not all nodes are giant, huge developments. When nodes can be a little more mellow than just something giant.
Ben, 2 thoughts to the whiteboard. Knox, after you.
I say a node can be, a kinder, gentler word. In many cases, it would be a village. A node is like a village. It's just kind of where you have a little more mixed use, but it's it's neighborhood commercial, to use the old phrase that we use. It should be neighborhood commercial. Other nodes would be a little more urban-like, but many of them would be more of a village atmosphere. Mm-hmm. And with all the good things that come to that. So, the terminology is important, and that node word could scare people. As far as specifics, I think the transition zones, I'm sure we'll touch on that. I'll just mention that because that always comes up. How do you transition from a node, whether it's high intensity or low intensity village? Those tools in place to make transitions is obviously very important. We keep stubbing our toe on those from time to time.
Well, it knocks along the same lines. If you remember in Vision 2025, one of the key components was keep the village in Greenville, where when you're in Nickeltown, you maintain the heritage and the authenticity of Nickeltown. Same with the other special interest neighborhoods. Same with the West End. But I think one thing that's going to be important about these nodes is making sure we maintain the unique personalities of each of the neighborhoods and not make them all look the same.
Yeah, this is personal preference and perhaps small potatoes, but while we're talking along this line, I think node's a great term to use internally. As we carry this further externally, we need a synonym to node. It sounds too Star Trek-ish. That second bullet point there, that it was there. Where'd the screen go? So the previous thing about neighborhoods, thank you, existing neighborhoods. I've been a big proponent for years now about zoning overlays. I'm glad that we've seen that take its shape in the downtown master plan. And so I think strategies to put in place to protect existing neighborhoods are as appropriate, some sort of zoning overlays that define what makes sense in a given neighborhood, specifically by the people who have been there for a long time. And they want to see things stay the same within their specific neighborhood. So I would definitively advocate for that. And then the zoning ordinance, what should be in the zoning ordinance? We've already touched on this in recent weeks. In fact, I think Shannon brought it up at our last council work session, but those absolute missing zoning districts zoning designations that pave the way and are literally put in place to provide Greenville with what we think we ought to have moving forward, whether that's, to Barry Knox's point, smaller lot sizes to drive affordable housing opportunities, or zoning designations that create business types, facilitate certain types of commercial activity that heretofore we just haven't really seen the desire for.
One of the things that we need to realize in order to protect neighborhoods is that if people are in one particular zoning class, then it needs to be a zoning class that fits that community. If we have all single-family homes, then RM1, RM2 really are not a portion of that, and we shouldn't. And that we need to classify neighborhoods in terms of the greatest uses they have for that particular area. Not to say that there couldn't be exceptions, but the exceptions should the planning and zoning can arrange that, but they should match the land use.
Well, and the document calls specifically for a 30 unit per acre density, so RM3 is going to have to be developed, recognizing it's sort of a missing piece or a error in our current land use code. But I mean, if we adopt it, we're adopting a motion to create an RM3 30 unit per acre category that we don't now have. Mm-hmm.
On the process side, something we figured out years ago, and it's a little bit of wisdom that other cities can learn from, and Barry would appreciate this, is that people come out to talk about what they don't want to see in their neighborhood. That's called a zoning fight. We see that happen. When we have these planning sessions, there's a huge benefit in trying to be proactive And instead of people jumping immediately to what they don't want to have, we always start our meetings out a different way. We always make people, whether they want to or not, we say, no, first we're going to talk about what's good about your neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
What do you want to see more of in your neighborhood? What do you like in your neighborhood? And it's an interesting dynamic. Barry, you remember the neighborhood meetings we had years ago? And
yes.
people would come and you'd have the naysayers and you have people there with the axe to grind. And it was a little frustrating for them in the beginning because we would not let the group talk about the negative first. We first drilled down on what about your neighborhood do you like, and what do you want to see more of, and that just changed the whole dynamic. And once we established that and had plans to get more of the good things, recruitment, otherwise, then we turned to what do you don't like. And every time we've done that over the years, it's just changed the whole atmosphere and given us a much more creative document and emphasize the positive and at the same time let everyone speak about the negative too.
Yeah. People fear change, and any change they immediately jump to what could be worse rather than realizing it could be a lot better.
And it's important for everyone to talk about, what do you like about it. So having a character plan for the neighborhoods proactively and letting people know we're listening. And we're going to work on that as well as hear what they don't want and what they're afraid of.
One other comment that's more general. I think we need to give the manager marching orders to work on hiring someone to rewrite our LMO as well as hiring a full-time person to implement the comp plan. This is too big to be a part of another staff person's job. It really is a full-time job. So we probably at some point should talk about, maybe it's a budget discussion on where and how we hire the LMO consultant as well as a full-time staff person.
So let's touch on that right now while we're in this. I appreciate that. I appreciate you raising that, Russell, because I couldn't agree more. And what's the topic of this particular breakout? Land use?
Land use, yeah.
All right.
Sorry for getting this off, Barry.
No. I mean, right? I mean, this is the bread and butter in the wheelhouse of a planning apparatus, right? Mm-hmm. Land use. So let me join Russell in saying what I shared a couple weeks ago in conversation with several of you, at least members of the staff, and that is now as much as ever, but it's been true at points in the past. I think not only do we believe that it's imperative we have the strongest, best planning apparatus, stable of human resources, the absolute top talent. And let me be careful. I'm not saying we don't have great talent now. I am saying that I've talked with each of you on this call too many times in years past about how if only we had this, or, but if only we had more hours in the day, more people, more bandwidth, we could do whatever. Everything we're talking about today hinges on best-in-class planning. I mean, Greenville leading the league in this category. And what I'm getting a little tired of is the absence of a pathway that says it's going to take this to do that. It's going to take this many people quantitatively. It's going to take this type of person qualitatively. And it's going to take this investment specifically over time in our planning department. So I heard Russell say, we need to give some sort of directive to the city manager. What I'd like to say once and for all is, City of Greenville professional staff, what is it going to take specifically for us to hang our hat on the best-in-class leading planning apparatus, and let's invest in that more so than anything else. That's where I'm at, because then I think all things will cascade off of that investment.
Before we go further, this is the part where you guys get to look really smart and show just how little I know. And don't take this question as not agreeing with you on this. But my understanding is we're going to be hiring consultants to do the zoning and to redo the zoning code, redo all those different things. Once that's done, what would a full-time LMO consultant do?
You mean a staff person, a full-time staff person?
Yeah.
Wouldn't that person be the chief of making sure that what is approved going forward is consistent with the Greenville 2040 goals? In other words, they're the Greenville 2040 czar.
Okay, so we're looking at not just, if that's the case, we're not looking at just an LMO consultant. We're looking at someone full-time to keep us on the right path as far as the entire 2040 plan is concerned. Is that right, or is that separate from what you're talking about, Russell?
Yeah, in my humble opinion, we put so much pressure on our planners that they've been really put into being zoners. I mean, they've been putting into being administrators of the zoning and haven't been given the opportunity to be real planners. And this person I'm thinking of, or this position, would be someone who continually watches where we are, tracks progress on how we're doing on the plan, and is really focused on planning and instead of just zoning administration and zoning approval. It's a bit of a bigger role and kind of a little more undefined than a typical person, but it's somebody that pays attention every day of what's going on with the comp plan and how are we doing and keeping us on track.
Yeah, let me add a little flavor to this discussion, which I think will help. Anticipating a lot of this, we've made some organizational changes really over the last 7 months in the middle of COVID, particularly around planning, with an emphasis on splitting up. To Russell's point, we spend a tremendous amount of time, and that shop has traditionally had a lot of turnover through the years. We're trying to bring stability, hire the best people that we possibly can, but we've broken that group into two different elements from a planning perspective. One, which is the day-to-day, the zoning, and that's what we've spent a lot of time in the past several years dealing with all the growth and development, but also a future planning group, which is exactly where what you all are talking about, this oversight should reside. So I think we're making the right moves internally, organizationally. We still have some work to do there, but I think we're already moving in that direction. To the question that came up about marching orders on the consultancy work related to updating the LDO and the zoning ordinance itself. We're already working on that. That's something, probably 3 or 4 weeks ago, Shannon and I have been coordinating on. We've got some good examples of where it's been done well in other places. We're refining that, and it's our intent, even before we get to the next fiscal year, to have that out on the street. So we all know that takes, it's probably a 60, 75-day process to get it out, to get, back to your proposals, to evaluate them, to do your interviews, and ultimately to make a recommendation to council, because this is important enough to do that and have you all involved in that process. So all of those actions are already underway, anticipating, what's coming out of the 2040, the recommendations we all saw, and we were part of them, helping develop those. So I think we're well on our way. I know this is what the mayor likes to do with a lot of our capital projects, is to get the planning work done well in advance so that we can hit the ground when the dollars are available to be able to implement those projects. So I feel pretty good about where we are, and that should be going out in the next week or so, out on the street, the request for those firms to help us update our zoning ordinance, if that makes sense.
Well, John, I really applaud that, because one of the things that I am concerned about, and I know that a number of other council members are concerned about as well, is we've spent a lot of money and effort on this plan. So it's, we really want to try to make sure that going forward, it's not just some document that gets put off to the side, and then all of a sudden we start in the day-to-day, lose sight of it and lose focus on it. So, I think Russell's suggestion is a great one, and if you've already, thinking along those lines, I think that is outstanding. But I know that is something that is important to me, and quite frankly, it's something that I've gotten a number of emails about as well, to try to make sure that there's some apparatus in place to make sure that that we are continually adhering to the priorities that we've set in the 2040 plan and going forward.
John, as part of that, do you foresee bringing a consistency policy to council in March for approval?
We actually want to discuss that with you, Councilmember Dow, as part of our presentation today. So
it's coming up, Dorothy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Should we go on to the next?
Yes.
To open space?
I think we should. Thank you, Dr. Knox.
Okay. Thomas, do you want to? Am I doing that? Okay, I guess I'm doing that. All right, so we have a goal for increasing open space. We talked about annexation as part of this.
All right, I'm going to jump in if nobody else will. Pardon my passion. I have 2 points. The first is we need to create a better definition of what open space is. The term open space implies that it's just a bunch of fields, and we need to marry in the importance of trees and canopy into the definition of open space and recreational areas. But also, I would like to expand that to be beyond just open space and then continue to include the and environment piece of it. We have to spend more time dealing with climate change and dealing with keeping the green in Greenville. There are 38 Greenvilles in the United States, and we want to be the greenest, although other Greenvilles really aren't that green. We should have a very deliberate focus on climate change and develop we need a action plan. And you know, I would even suggest that we have a department set up to deal with sustainability. So, I mean, open space is a whole lot more than just we need to have a Unity Park.
So regarding open space, I mean, I've almost looked at it as simple as kind of like the pervious, impervious conversation we often look at, paved and non-paved. I mean, I don't know if we need to literally say this percentage of, just for conversation's sake, open field, this percentage of tree canopy, what have you. Now, of course, we're doing the important work of the tree ordinance, looking at canopy in particular. But, you know, when I've looked at open space, I've just generally thought about what percent of our city do we want just to be non-paved and non-developed. And to my perception was that's kind of where we're heading from an outcomes marker in GVL2040 with that 35% target. So I don't know how many layers of definition we need under that 35%. But
I think of it as pervious. I'm right there with you, Will. To me, grass, because I do think our tree ordinance is what covers canopy, but I don't know how it gets worked into this, but I think we have to be realistic about our capacity as a city to absorb responsibility for more parks. In other words, my perception is that our parks and rec are stretched to the limit in their ability to maintain what we already have in terms of pocket parks, large parks, all that. So unless there are added resources to that, you know, what can we do to ensure that as development grows and has green space included in it, that the private sector shares in the responsibility for those spaces? And to be clear, they're doing a great job, not knocking the job they're doing. In fact, under Angie's leadership, they've come so far. But I definitely feel us stressed in that area.
And on that second bullet point that says, should we conduct a commission study on open space policy, that makes me think back to the earlier question I raised to Thomas, which was, do we know with certainty that these goals in place right now are attainable? My earlier question was, can we preserve the existing character of neighborhoods while still achieving our affordable housing goal. If we're going to go down the node strategy, do we know with certainty right now that embracing that strategy will allow us to hit our open space target? Simply because if you had 15 nodes in the future and one node skimped or didn't achieve a certain open space goal, that therefore puts heightened pressure on all the other nodes to achieve it, presumably, unless you're going to somehow accomplish your open space through annexation or something else, right? Does that make sense?
And Councilman Brazington, I would just add to that. Yeah, that does make sense. I would add to that the nodes make up about, give or take, 800 acres in the community, roughly as we've identified them, right? So you're looking at roughly 4% of Greenville's land area. The intent would be that certainly some open space parks, plazas would be incorporated into the nodes, but it wouldn't be the 35% necessarily that you're aiming for there. That is really kind of your village center, your more dense centers, right? But that opportunity to focus development in that 4% of the community allows for the preservation of open space in the other areas. We identified about 2,700 acres in terms of vacant lands, et cetera. They're not defined as open space, they're not defined as parks, they're not defined as trails, but those are the opportunities that you may have for future acquisition, et cetera. It could even be that as development is funneled into the nodes, there could be impact fees or others assessed for open space acquisition in the other areas. That way, you're laying out the patchwork of open space throughout the community. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Did you say 2,700 acres of open space?
You have about 2,700 acres of vacant land.
Vacant, and remind me, I recall touching on the past this very important topic, but of that 2,700 acres, some of it is existing city park space.
Actually, no, this is just 2,700 acres of vacant land. You have about 1,150 acres of parkland, city parkland, kind of golf courses, trails kinds of spaces. So the intent would be that of that 2,700 acres, a goal could be 35% of that could be acquired for the future of Greenville to preserve ad infinitum, right?
Gotcha. Cool.
A goal of growth and maintaining and creating more green space are compete with each other. So if we have a goal of increasing open space, which let's not define open space as vacant lots, please. But if we define, I forgot where I was going. But if we define open space, or if we want more open space, then we have to be able to accept and encourage higher density, more height, and some of the neighborhoods. And that's a trade-off we're going to have to deal with.
That is a good point. And to your point also, I would say you're right. The vacant land is just vacant land. It's not guaranteed open space at this point. It's not necessarily tree canopy. But if development takes place in the nodes, there could be potentially impact fees, other mechanisms by which we would buy that vacant land and convert it into parks, community parklets, et cetera. You're right. There is a transformation that needs to take place from vacant land to open space.
Yeah, we're not celebrating vacant land as the desired and preferred quote unquote open space, but back to this notion of pervious versus impervious, it is pervious. And unless we're going to tear down impervious and turn it to pervious, we've got to keep that in the inventory catalog of stuff that could go to desirable open space.
Mm-hmm. Seems like we still are wrestling with the definition a bit. I mean, I appreciate open space. Land values are pretty high, so how we're going to acquire that is a difficult thing. I do, though, at the same time, I like the idea that this category would speak to green space in a more general way, such as the fact, like we had a consultant years ago who said, well, your main street is a green space. Your main street is a park, in fact. And I always thought, yeah, he's right. Our main street is a park. It has a hardscape sidewalk system, but it has these massive trees and certainly has the feel and look of a nice park-like environment. That's why we like our main street so much. So I still think there's a role for getting what Russell said about keeping the green in Greenville, and we all want to do that. I think that's still an important part of this. So you have open space, but you also just, green space. The tree ordinance, we should commit ourselves on our corridor plans, not just the nodes, but on the corridor plans, that our corridors be green, I would think, because that's the way we are in Greenville. We want all the corridors to be tree lined and have a consistent landscape plan of some sort, something they don't have now. They don't have any plan at all. But I would think that's what this would mean too. So maybe still have to kind of help us with, is there a difference between enhancing the green of Greenville on one hand and open space on the other? Because I'm still a little bit confused on how it's articulated in the plan.
What would it take to turn it into just change open to green? Thomas, does that just screw up everything in the analysis?
No, I mean, you could think of it as green space, but let me just back up for 1 second. As we defined the open space to 35%, the recommendation would be that would basically, maybe the easiest way to think about it is almost in a real estate term, dare I say, but think of it as deep restricted open space, right? Whether it's public rights of way that have become trails, green trails, right? Or whether it is a protected park, or whether it is a protected community garden or a community green space. Think of it as protected space, right?
Well,
I think that might say that again.
Almost under easement, kind of a conservation easement.
It could be conservation easement. It could be deed restriction. It could be owned by the city, owned by a nonprofit, or again a community garden or something like that. So they could be small spaces, but I would think of them as preserved. And to the mayor's point, I think that we outlined pretty clearly in the corridor plan the importance of streetscape. Right? You guys have done such a wonderful job building off of the Lawrence Halpern concept for downtown, incorporating trees, that, streetscapes are a part of your kind of green area. But again, streets are public rights of way. They're not necessarily deed restricted or protected under a conservation easement for green space. They're kind of an enhancement. So think about the 35% as we acquire, we convert to park, or we protect it, we plant trees, that kind of thing. It's protected open space.
One of the things in my community, we have a lot of little wetland spaces. My area, the Reedy River, is all excited about it. So I'm just saying, and because we, I assume, did not protect this area earlier, there are several places where there are homes that were built right over that space, and people are having to move, or they're having to pipe in things, and undoubtedly it happened years ago because houses were always there. But that type of wetland is all in the West Greenville Southern Side area.
Right.
I wanted to have some kind of wonderful name so we don't build over it, but et cetera. So that has to be open space. That has to remain open space, right, because you can't build over it. So I want it to be protected.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Thomas, let me try to sink my tongue in my mind to articulate this question. Is there any common practice in the planning world about per individual that makes up a city's population, what sort of a industry standard or best in practice mark would be, like percent of an acre per individual? I mean, how do you sync up head count in the city with desirable units of open space?
There are studies that could define that for you. So even on the second bullet point here, a study with regard to open space policy and disbursement, there is a national parks standard that can be a study, an analysis that can be run for the community to identify if you achieve the recommended per square feet of open space for your population per capita, right? So that study could be conducted so that you would have an understanding of whether you're ahead of the curve or behind the curve.
Yeah. I'm glad I was successful in trying to articulate what was on my mind. You know, oftentimes I try to capture data, and sometimes people say, well, what are you trying to use that data for? And I'll respond by saying, well, I'm not quite sure yet, but without that data, I won't have the type of perspective or relative knowledge to know if we're doing better or worse than we otherwise would have thought.
Mm-hmm.
And so that might be handy if we don't already have a good grasp on that.
Yeah, but remember, those standards are for like parks and recreation areas, as opposed to the kind of green permeable space that we talk about. And that's all dependent on density and topography and so on.
And location to boot, but that study could give you at least a rough baseline, and you can certainly adjust and include different parameters in the study. They're fairly straightforward, but at least it does give you a per square foot per capita based on the population.
Well, we know we're after open space for a lot of different reasons. We spent plenty of time talking about the merits or the benefits of achieving open space, but I think the ultimate for us, at least it is for me, is just what will bundle as quality of life. And so presumably this type of study will speak to that for the average person anywhere. They're going to have the corresponding quality of life they deserve if there's this amount of open space at their disposal.
Yeah, I think that'd be an important component of that study, that bullet point number 2. I think you're right there. And, it's interesting. The need per square foot per capita need has changed over the past decade or so. It may be worth noting that trails tend to be a more desirable open space. You need less square feet of trails for use by a greater percent of your population. That's kind of been a past decade transition in terms of open space. But most of the analyses for parks and open space national study that different communities are using, that kind of touches on that and leads to that as well.
I wanted to make a point about, in terms of being intentional about this, we've had some good examples in the past. The area under the Church Street Bridge comes to my mind. It used to be a very derelict area, blighted, and working with a private developer, we were able to take some city money, then some private money, which is always good, to turn the area of the Church Street Bridge into a very nice green space and trail system. And the point is there's many more opportunities out there if we would just open our eyes to them, areas that could become public open space that you might walk by now and not even notice. That's one point. The second one, on a larger note, Lillian mentioned the wetlands. I want to make sure, and I think we may have some new language in this plan already about it, but I think the Reedy River needs to appear here. The preservation, embrace of the Reedy River, enhancement of the Reedy River, which we're already doing this, but it's to me our greatest, most distinctive green space opportunity in the city. So I think it needs to be highlighted here.
Well, and I would add to that, development along the Reedy River needs to be protected.
Yeah.
Barry, were there discussions, assumptions about the green space preservation for the Hollingsworth property, which is probably our last bastion of large green space privately held, as well as the Clemson CUI car property? In other words, we're going to lose ground on green space with those as they're developed, hopefully gain ground on green space as Lawrence Road corridor is developed. But I'm just curious as to what presumptions were made about that in coming up with the 35% goal. And to be clear, it's up to unlike the affordable housing goal, which is at least 10%, right? The green space goal is up to 35%.
Well, several points. One is that, and Thomas, you were at these meetings too, my sense was that we were looking for undeveloped land, open space that could be preserved. And as you know, Hollingsworth and ICAR are areas of likely development that do have a lot of open space still existing. So those are areas I think that were in people's minds of, I won't say low-hanging fruit, but at least targeted land of value as opposed to an empty lot here, an empty lot there, scattered around the city. So in that sense, yes, those are definitely places where we were looking for that, or the steering committee was looking for that. And I would say that, the land management ordinance, looking at each node and being sensitive to each node, would try to denote a character and regulation that would promote a lot of vacant land and open space, green space. The 35% number, those Basically, the steering committee people looked at a variety of numbers, and sort of the consensus was around a number of that scale. So you're right, it's not an exact number in terms of we need exactly these many acres and we'll all be happy and self-fulfill, but rather it was kind of within several of them. And it was toward the higher end of the conversation, as I recall.
Yeah, it may be worth noting that when the steering committee walked through kind of this block exercise about how much open space do we want to preserve and how much density do we want to put into the nodes, I mean, the numbers ranged from roughly 25% to as much as 75% of the available vacant land should be preserved. And so we took that information, worked with the steering committee. The number that was settled on was 35%. That 35% was based on some analysis that we presented to the committee. They settled on the 35%, but that was basically, you know, it's really, you're saying roughly a third of our vacant land we would like to save into the future. And so it's a pretty standard recommendation. It also based on the anticipated population growth. It allows for maintaining the level of parks and open space per capita that you have now. Right? As the population grows, you'll still want this open space to be within the community. So that's where they settled on 35%. But there were some on the steering committee that went significantly higher than that.
Right. And they also had, just as this discussion has, different ideas of what open space was. Some of it was tree cover, some of it was park, some of it was, climate control, climate change issues, and so on. So it's just a whole variety of perspectives about it. And it sort of fit in this one lump category with many meanings.
And a price tag was put on that. I mean, the plan calls out a budget line item price tag.
To answer the question about the study, we study a lot of stuff, and I don't want us to get in the mindset of we have a problem in the city, so let's just study it, instead of we know the problem exists, so let's fix it. But as far as a actual study at this point, my opinion is we get the person on to facilitate the comp plan. They pull together all the other master plans that we have going on and try to marry those together, and then figure out if we need a study on open space. It's kind of weird to me that we implement or we pass a tree ordinance and then after the fact we study it. It just doesn't seem to make sense to me.
I agree. It's time to fish or cut bait, and we have studied and studied and studied. I wholeheartedly agree.
It's always an issue, yeah.
Let me offer to that. I do think there's a delineation between commissioning a study and committing oneself to perpetually capturing and analyzing data. And so my interest is more, and I was very vocal on this about the tree ordinance, which was, we don't need to find some grand consultant and do a 12-month study and showcase the results, but let's understand what data we can collect through what tools, and let's commit ourselves over time to managing and measuring our progress. One comment I do want to offer before we move on council's expectation on open space, and this is not council's expectation per se, it's just simply a member of council's mind, is as we look ahead at the implementation of GVL2040 and as we consider its underlying priorities, we have been, and it's a good thing, committing a lot of financial resources towards affordable housing, more so than in previous years. And we have been committing a lot of resources, more so than in previous years, on transit. But when we start talking about this third priority area, in my humble opinion, natural resources, open space, trees, everything else, I want to see through our budgeting process and our allocation of financial resources a greater investment in this category than what I think we have been able to commit and willing to commit in the past. I don't know what that increment is. I don't know how that manifests itself. But, again, going back to trees as one facet of this, whatever our blind item budget has been on that category, I think we got to do more if we're going to stand behind this as a priority.
All right. For the sake of time, I think we probably need to move on to how we have 3 more items: housing, transportation, and consistency. So that puts us under pressure.
Thomas, would you like to go ahead and take this one and help us with getting us started on the affordable housing conversation?
Sure. So the recommendation in the plan for affordable housing is 10%, and typically the recommendation in the plan would be that most of this affordable housing is probably going to end up in or around the nodal development. So some of this ties to incentives that would be a part of the land management ordinance, because you aren't allowed to incorporate inclusionary zoning pursuant to South Carolina law. This is really focused on that partnership approach for the nodes. And to the mayor's point earlier, this is supplemental to what is already going on with the housing trust and the city's efforts there as well. So this is getting that extra few percent beyond the 7 or 8% where you have tended to land over the past 5 or so years. This is getting above the 10% line with those public-private partnerships. Are people generally comfortable with the density? It sounds as if you've used that in the past. Are folks generally comfortable with incorporating that into the nodal development components of the land management ordinance?
I don't know that we've necessarily used it. Definitely what we've seen are using facilitating affordable housing through tax credits, right? As far as a density bonus, like a height bonus or something like that, pursuant to, added on to what's already there. We've seen them in the downtown area where it wasn't a height issue, right? But I can definitely see that in the node development going forward. Certainly, we talked about it as options in the broad discussions on the county square area.
Yes, it hasn't actually been used. It hasn't been used by the city of Greenville, but it certainly has been used around the country, many developments, and very successfully. If you want a little more height, first of all, you have to have a height limit. If you want a little more height, then you have to do certain things, provide affordable housing, or perhaps just pay into a fund, something like that. But I think it would be well received. We've had developers. It's really come more from the development community where they've asked us, have we ever thought about this? Mayberry Street in the Unity Park area is going to be a great opportunity to do just that, to have a height limit, but to say to people, however, if you do, you'll add on one or 2 more floors or provide affordable housing.
Another way that we could consider, again, it's these tools in our toolkit, but in this new possible model of remote workspace, if we see repurposing of buildings that maybe don't make much sense as full office buildings, but repurposed to others, repurposing it to residential with some affordable, to me, is a tool we may have, depending on how the workspace looks coming out of COVID. So where something once was a full office building, somebody might want to be converting it to residential. And I would look more favorably on that if it included some affordable in there as part of that conversion.
Yep.
Are we allowed with inclusionary zoning to be currently illegal until Mr. DeWorking gets it through the legislature? Are we allowed to do these do we have these tools that we can use?
You can incentivize, you can't mandate.
Okay.
But it's a stick versus a stick. So we don't have that stick, and I think the world of John DeWorkin, but I'm not sure I'll see that in my lifetime. And the carrot issue, that is a pure carrot. But to me, a tax credit for including affordable housing is a carrot. Sure. But in repurposing buildings, that's a carrot.
And to your point, Councilwoman Dow, there is also the opportunity for, I think you're probably speaking of low-income housing tax credits maybe for projects. There's also, depending which building that might be repurposed, for example. Maybe there's a historic building that is an office building. There's also historic tax credits. If that's a designation, that provides a significant amount of equity for redevelopment of a building or rehabilitation of a building.
Yeah, abandoned buildings too.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
For properties that we own and sell to developers, we can mandate affordable housing as whatever percentage we want, whatever AMI that we want, as a component of that. With that said, I want to go back to this first question, and should we establish a public-private task force to determine how the 10% shared will be achieved? I mean, I'm sort of interested in seeing, what the city manager is putting forth as far as, in search of a better term, this ombudsman who's going to keep us on track as far as the plan is concerned. Because I think that should be certainly one of the things that this, again, in search of a better term, ombudsman will make sure that we do and constantly be thinking about as we, adopt various actions. My thoughts on a public-private task force, I just don't know who would be on that public-private task force. I'm not against it, but
in my opinion about that, Ken, is let's take advantage of what we already have in place. I mean, the housing fund is an amazing resource that we need to continue to take advantage of, and the Homeless Alliance, the housing. I mean, there are a lot of organizations that are currently focused on this, and I just worry if we try to create yet another task force when we already have the players in place right now.
And I absolutely agree with you on that. But one thing I would say on that, and I don't know how well these groups or to what extent they actually interact with each other. I mean, I'm actually on the Housing Authority Board now, so I know what they do.
It's a lot better than it was 10 years ago. 10 years ago it was horrible, but now and I think a lot of it's been driven by, Susan McClarty's been so involved and so engaged, as well as Brian and his crowd. It's extremely collaborative now.
Yeah, and to the extent we can get them working together, and because they do sort of the same thing, but they also attack it from extremely different ways. To get them working better together and more cohesively together, I think would help us a great bit. But like I say, I'm a little hesitant about doing anything at this point until we kind of figure out, what we're going to be doing from the city as far as making sure that we stay on track on this goal.
Let me just throw out one other issue, and that is missing middle housing in terms of regulations and so on that encourage all kinds of varieties of housing options that would be affordable, that would fit people in different phases of their lives, and to make sure that the ordinances that are developed welcome those kind of options.
Yeah.
Barry, and I think to that point, we did a fair amount of education on what is missing housing, I'm going to say in 2018, but I think there has been a misperception, and I'll put myself at the front of that pack, that missing middle housing means housing based on certain income levels rather than the form.
Right.
That it's the form in keeping, it's what it looks like. It's not who's living in it.
Yeah.
It's living in it.
Yeah, it's flexibility in the types of housing regardless of income.
But that missing middle model deserves resurrection and more promotion, because we never really it never really got traction.
Right.
And now we're circling back to it. It's another tool in our toolbox.
Yes, exactly.
Discussion of that.
And it's bigger than missing middle. It's bigger than affordable housing. A term I heard recently was attainable housing, which I love that term.
What was the term again?
Attainable housing.
Yeah.
It's just bigger than that, and I think we can really set some standards if we pay attention to it.
Right. Okay. For the sake of time, can we move on? We have transportation and consistency.
The answer to the question 3 is yes.
I will say yes as a line item in the budget.
Okay.
This capital throw, I'm not a fan of. We can talk about that down the road.
All right, so this next topic is about transportation and connectivity and basically connecting the nodes and providing a variety of modalities for travel.
The transportation conversation is a lot bigger as well. It's the conversation about mobility. It's not.
Exactly.
When we say transportation, you think of buses and bikes, but it's a lot more than that. It's really a connectivity issue.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, I agree with Russell. It's like an access, right? Access to healthcare, jobs,
right?
Education. I'm sure many others. In the I'm not a one-trick pony. I keep talking about economic development, so my apologies. But, this is such a huge workforce development issue as well.
Yes. I know TOP has a big mobility initiative, and the employment people are the ones that are major pushers of this.
Yeah, I would say in terms of the public transit portion of it, we now speak of it, and when I say we, I mean the Greenville Transit Authority Board, partnerships on task force, people we're collaborating with on the county. Public transit is an economic development issue. And, obviously has to be part of Merle's plan. Obviously the investment centers around that, and that is just it, plain and simple. It is an economic development issue for public transit. I will also say in the plan, in the comp plan, there are some numbers that are put in there for for investment for capital for public transit. And that too, it kind of speaks towards the climate issue that Russell was bringing up. We have different options on how we can fund transit and the degree to which they are climate friendly. And those numbers are kind of middle of the road. They're not electric buses, they're not diesel buses. It's kind of middle of the road. But, I think in terms of what transit looks like, public transit in the next 10 years is going to be vastly different with the opening of the new maintenance center, more investment in compressed natural gas buses, maybe some electric buses. All of that's going to come online.
But I think that if we're talking about making bold statements and moving forward, it should be that it is our recommendation that we will do everything we can to make sure the public transit is environmentally friendly, and that it is part of our sustainability. Our sustainability objectives going forward.
It's got to be, Lillian. It's got to be.
It's got to be. I'm saying because it's out there where people breathe, and it has to be. We don't have a choice.
Yeah, we are really kind of a forerunner in that. And that is part of, that business recruitment, that we're doing bold things in public transit as it relates to climate. And that should be part of what we push in our recruitment. Not only do we need to invest in a robust public transit for workforce development, for economic development, but what we have and what we have planned, is very bold in terms of climate.
And when we recruited Proterra years ago, that was with that idea in mind, that we would actively recruit green businesses to Greenville, and Proterra is a gold standard. The hope was it would be, and it really is a gold standard. And as we go out to places like California, Proterra is a door opener. When people learned that Proterra is in Greenville, they were interested in Greenville also. So I think that's something that's a great asset that we probably need to focus again. I I know Merle, one of the earliest people Merle spoke to was Proterra, but I would just encourage him to really keep that conversation going because they have a lot of friends in high places, is the way I'll put it, and can bring more attention to Greenville.
And I don't have a problem with putting something that says that we will continue to work with our county and state legislators to help improve the accessibility to public transportation. I'm just saying it's not something that if 66% of the people who ride the bus transportation itself, public transit, is from the county, hello, we shouldn't be talking about isolationism. I'm just saying I just think that should be a goal and something that we need to work for, an action item that we need to continue the dialogue with our county and state and federal officials in order to find funding in order to improve the quality of public transit and the accessibility.
There needs to be a public, I guess, congratulations or thanks to James and his crowd. At Greenlink, they've been able to do incredible things over just the last year in a time of COVID with no resources, and I just really want to applaud their creativity and innovation and the ability to do incredible things. It really has been phenomenal watching what Greenlink has been able to do with expansion of routes, with the more electric buses coming in. It's, thank you guys over there, I guess.
Oh, we gave them the resources. The council got them the buses. The council lobbied for the buses. Council went to Washington D.C. Council, but they got the better resources. But kudos also to the larger community for getting the county on board, because I really do think that was a team effort with the chamber and other people to do what I didn't think was possible, to get the county to really step up. And now I think they're over the $1 million mark in their contribution to GTA. I hope it stays there. That's going to be the issue now.
Well, the other thing to recognize in this planning is in 2023, when that new maintenance facility comes online, that will be a huge game changer.
Yeah.
A huge game changer. And so planning for that, that's a pivotal time we need to recognize.
Yeah.
Hey, Barry, let me raise this question. I'm staring very specifically at the wording in green that says, as we rewrite the LMO,
right,
how should the city address this? And so part of what's on my mind staring at that question is a lot of what we're talking about right now is critical for us to make strides in mobility and make better, continued investment in our transit options. But I mean, are there very specifically things pertaining to the LMO that we've got to have top of mind and get right to pave the way and create the underlying conditions that will make you understand what I'm saying there? I mean, let's be environmentally friendly. That has nothing. I mean, that's not the LMO. But
well, certainly complete streets would be something you would want, so that the streets could accommodate and encourage walking, biking, transit, automobile, and any other forms that are there, so that it's much broader, more broadly stated, and more broadly encouraged.
Well, I can think of one thing. I mean, as we transition towards more density, particularly within the interior of the city, we're going to really need to make absolutely certain that we have transit that can service those those more denser areas, because otherwise we're going to have a ton of people moving in, and we're going to have a stress on our parking that we're not going to be able to keep up with.
Right.
So as we're creating nodes, corridors, whatever the name we ultimately decide upon, we need to make sure that we're planning for transit to make sure that those people, assuming that they work downtown, hopefully, in office buildings downtown, that we can have transit that will conveniently get them downtown with hopefully not having them need to make use of the parking structures and monopolize those. So I'd say that's one thing that we need to look at as far as the LMO is concerned.
Yes.
That was our had been our thought on the trolley service, which we implemented the city, and we really, and maybe it's just not ready for it. The rollout of the neighborhood trolley service, not the downtown trolley service, but the rollout that goes all the way to the village, and others. We actually talked about having one go up to Nickeltown, but that is something we've had some experience with now, and it's still a very good idea that we, as a city, we can connect our neighborhoods with the trolleys. I will say on the success side, we have the North Main experience where we actually do have people using it back and forth from the North Main area.
Maybe one thing to flag under LMO here, and specifically in C2 or whatever, whatever successor commercial zoning designations we may come up with in this exercise. Coincidentally, I just had a great conversation yesterday with some local developers about the current parking restrictions or requirements found within C2 zoning. And even while we talk about future modes of transit, evolution of complete streets, everything else, I don't think we can be naive to think that good old-fashioned vehicular transit and parking is going to somehow fade away in 10 to 20 years. It's still going to be a critical component. If we're going to make an intentional move to force density in certain areas, we'll have to think through naturally what parking looks like, minimum, maximum requirements, and what role, if any, incentive-wise or requirement-wise, the development community will have to pay on that. Because as we know, there's some concerns and requirements of the present, not to even mention what those concerns or requirements of the future may require out of necessity to achieve this future model.
This is a really important conversation. The past plan at Greenville in 2009, called for transit-oriented development, which is an earlier version of these nodes, but there was nothing in it for implementation. So, this conversation, trying to get this to really happen, I think is critical.
Part of this, to me, I keep thinking about who we're building this for, and the people that are going to, reap the benefits of the node corridor 20 years from now are far younger than us. And based on personal experience and observation, I have to keep reminding myself that I don't think this next generation values car ownership as much as my generation did. So they're car ownership verse, largely because of the cost, I guess, and not to mention the environmental impact. So again, when we talk about being bold, bold needs to recognize that maybe those coming down the road aren't as car-oriented as we ourselves are. And what does that mean for our parking space per unit requirements in the future? I think it means less.
It's a good point, Dorothy, I think that you raised, and I agree with that notion, but the devil's advocate might also say, because you said the next generation, I didn't hear you say the younger folks, you said the next generation, which could be the next installment of Greenville residents of any age.
No, I meant the younger folks. I meant the younger.
So to that, I would say that we're talking about the next 10 to 20 years, and while I agree with what you say, the devil's advocate might say, I know a lot of 35, 40, 45, and 50-year-olds here now that plan to be here in 20 years that really appreciate their cars. Mm-hmm. They may or may not change those habits even as new folks and younger folks come in who have a different outlook on how they want to get around. Mm-hmm. It's going to be both ends.
I'm speaking more towards newcomers of that younger age group, where they'll choose to live and the likelihood that they are car friendly or car averse. I'm saying they're probably going to be car averse, but yeah, nonetheless, we have plenty of 35s and up here now that are not going to give up their car. Me being one of them, to be candid. But I just think that node corridor model is going to have fewer people owning cars than, say, people who live in the current neighborhoods, right? The current neighborhoods, every driver tends to have a car if they can have access to one, if they can afford it. If not, if they're in the nodes, they might not look at it that way.
Yeah, I definitely think we need to be bold. We just need to be cautious in our assumptions.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Well, I was going to say that a big part of that car usage issue is the convenience of it. I mean, I've lived in a big city, and if you have convenient transportation that is reliable and comes, on a fairly quick basis, regular basis, it just makes sense to use it. I mean, when I was in D.C., I had a car, but I hardly ever drove that car. I got on it was just way easier to get on the bus and then get on the metro. And the same when I was in Atlanta. I had a car, but where I lived, it was just way far easier to get on the metro to get to work. I mean, if we develop, and this is where the money issue comes in. And which we have talked about before, if we put the resources in it to develop, regular transit, we'll have a number of people who will decide to use it that aren't using it now. Now, with that said, this is the South, so people are going to always have cars, and people are going to want their cars. But if on a daily basis we can make it convenient and reliable, we'll have a lot more people, particularly within the city limits, who will use transit as opposed to getting in a car. And particularly, like I say, for DC, it was a question of, okay, do I get on this metro and pay for this bus pass, or do I get in my car and sit in it for an hour and then have to pay, almost $100 a month for parking on top of that? You can create the incentives to make the usage. The question is, are we willing to put in the investment in, and are we willing to create the incentives in order to do it?
Amen.
Yeah. Just a time check. It's coming close to noon, and we can talk about consistency in a few minutes or longer, or what's your pleasure?
I'd like to touch on consistency, at least touch on it.
All right, why don't we move to that? And the next slide. All right, basically, the state planning enabling legislation requires that cities do a comprehensive plan to do zoning, and that they promise to be consistent. And that promise can take on a variety of levels of seriousness. Next slide. And kind of a range of consistency policies might be, first of all, just to pass a resolution and say we'll be good people and we'll be good stewards of the city, and our actions will be consistent with the plan. And then the city council does what it does. And they could be very consistent, or they could do what they want to do, whatever they do. A second approach might be annual reporting by the planning commission or council. And it could be retrospective in terms of looking at what they did and how they moved the plan forward. It could also be kind of looking forward in the sense of developing annual action plans in terms of what will they do. And a third set of possibilities might be to require a statement of consistency with planning-related council actions. So when you approve the tree ordinance, you might have a statement in there that this is consistent with the plan because it enhances green space, something like that. Or when you do a zoning change, why that's consistent with the plan, or how it fits in with what the plan does.
I like all three of those.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, you can do all three. I'm just trying to get you a range of kind of logical possibilities. And one would be an overall policy statement, two would be annual action, three would be specific action.
I'm in favor of all three.
Same. I mean, I'd like to see what the language, but yeah, I think we need to do everything we can to try to be consistent with this policy as possible.
We have to set clear direction so staff is not confused and we change our mind every hour and have them going down the rabbit hole and then coming back. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Amen.
That's what I'm
Are you
saying.
saying we change our mind?
I think it's refining your thinking.
Years of experience there.
Well, similar to, this is kind of a little bit more weedy, but in our permitting now, it asks the question how whatever you're applying for is consistent with Greenville 2040 plans. And so to me, as development occurs, that same question needs to be asked in the permitting process. If we hold ourselves to it, we have to hold our development to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, explain how it fits or speak to any deviations from the plan.
Right.
Put it that way.
I mean, I think that has to be specific, I really feel like it's in there now, but going forward, as permitting occurs, applications need to address how they fit with Greenville 2040. With this, on the all three, I agree with the rest of the council. As specific as we can get is good. As specific as we can get at this stage.
Yeah, that annual reporting to me is just good business practice. I mean, it prevents the proverbial, is that thing gathering dust on the shelf somewhere? And probably like each of colleagues on council, I mean, I've had specific conversations in recent weeks with people who have been stakeholders who have said, we hope that at some interval, every 6 months or every year, there will be a community report on how this thing's going. So kill a couple birds with one stone, that option too.
Well, good. Other thoughts?
We have developed a draft resolution with Dr. Knox's help that we will be presenting forward to you, but we wanted to present these options to you for direction prior to submitting that for review.
Shannon, I'd love to see that before the Friday, before the meeting, that we vote on it.
Absolutely.
That's always a very good reminder. We're fortunate to have a full, robust ability, I think, to communicate. And needless to say, we can't ever forget that most people don't know anything about this plan, haven't even heard of it. So we can't do enough to package this and get the messaging out on all different levels, to development community, to realtors, to developers of all kinds, and of course to our neighborhood associations and just generally. So look forward to seeing a good, robust press and media campaign throughout the whole effort. Certainly can't depend on the traditional media.
Thank
Very
you,
good.
Megan.
Yeah, great.
Are there any other further comments or discussion this afternoon specific to either the consistency policy or anything else that we've covered these past 3 hours?
Great job this morning. That was a great discussion.
Yes. You all were great.
Great discussion. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank all of you, Shannon, Barry, everybody.
Thomas.
Concur.
Thomas, thank you for your extra comments. Outside experts are always particularly valued. No, we appreciate it very much. You've really gotten into Greenville. I really appreciate some of the nuances of what you said. I thought, yeah, he's gotten to know us pretty well, so I appreciate that very much.
Mm-hmm. Boy, Thomas, we know some real estate agents. Hey.
What time do we reconvene, Shannon?
Yes, sir. We'll take a break now for lunch, and we'll reconvene at 1 p.m. this afternoon. And thank you all so much for your time, attention, and feedback.
Wait a minute. You said 1 p.m.?
Yes, sir.
Don't we need a little more time than that?
Well, we got a lot to cover, Mayor, but to give you a full hour, how about 1:15?
No, I was going to say even 1:15 would be appreciated. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Not
make it 1:15.
For lunch.
What kind of lunch are you having?
I got to find it. It's going to be hard. I'm coming to Dorothy's.
It'll be more than pizza.
If you come see me and I can eat it in less than an hour, welcome.
I got a Nature Valley bar here at the house.
We'll see you all at 1:15. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you,
Thank you.
Mr. Barry.
This is Mike Blizzard. Just be aware the second meeting is a different link.
Oh, okay.
Okay. All right.